Adrian will be presenting it though.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone this afternoon's Planning Committee meeting. Before we start, would like to confirm which committee members and officers are present.
Thank you, Chair. So joining us today for this virtual meeting are Councillors William Armitage, Andrew Cooper, Peter Elliott, Mark Fuster, Betty Hill, Heather Liggett, Mo Potts, Alan Powell, Tracy Reeder, Kathy Rouse, and yourself as the Chair of Planning Committee, Diana Ruff. Also in attendance today, you have the planning officers, Alice Lockett, Sue Wraith and Adrian Kirkham, members of the governance team who are supporting this meeting, and Jim Fieldsend from legal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As you know, we have a protocol in place for meeting in this virtual way, which I would now like the meeting facilitator to read out.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a reminder to all members to dress and behave as if in the council chamber in accordance with the etiquette for virtual meetings. A reminder that this meeting is being streamed and it is being recorded. If members would kindly speak through the chair, so that's remaining muted when not invited to speak, and to indicate to speak, please either raise your hand or write speak in the chat bar. If you'd be kind enough to turn on your closed captions if they're not already enabled, I will do some prompts to just let you know that your request to speak has already been picked up. If you'd be kind enough also to introduce yourself when you do speak. So for example, Councillor X representing Y Ward. Voting for this meeting will be undertaken by roll call for every application. Please just be mindful of your home surroundings and make sure that you appear alone on camera and to keep yourself on camera at all times where possible. Just to let you know, Chair, that also in attendance now is Councillor Ross Shipman.
Hi, Ross.
Hey up. Right.
Item 1 for this afternoon, apologies for absence.
All right, cheers, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillors Huckabee, Councillors Barry, and we've just received apology from Councillor Jackie Ridgely.
Thank you. Okay.
So did you get that, Chair?
I did, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Just scribbled them down. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yeah, I'm going to be speaking against the first item because
Okay.
I've already submitted something against the first application, and then I'm going to have to leave actually after that item. So,
Are you taking place in the debate or the voting, Ross, before you leave?
no, I won't. I'm going to speak against it. I think it wouldn't be fair if I were voting against that.
So you'll be speaking. So basically, you'll be speaking and then leaving the meeting and having no part in either the discussion or determination.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disposable interest and or other interests not already on the register. If any item on the agenda, they are asked to withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Other than Councillor Shipman's, have we received any?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any to be declared?
No indications, Chair.
No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. We now have the minutes of our meeting held on Tuesday, the 12th of January 2020. Are we happy that they are a correct record? And if so, is there a mover? Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, move it, Chair.
Councillor Armitage? All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Right, no abstentions. Thank you. The motion was carried. We will now start the main body of the afternoon, which is the application. And as you can see, we've 4 applications, each of which has its own report, marked as items 4 to 7. I am happy with this and intend to consider them in that order. However, before we do this, I would like the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers and the public who are watching on YouTube how they will be dealt with.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. We will consider the 4 applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda, although there may be a break between them. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation, setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. The screen showing this presentation will be shared with those attending the meeting. They can also be seen on the Council's website through its YouTube channel. Following on from this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views using the conferencing facility. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. When we have heard from all the speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by the committee members and then ultimately by determination by a vote. A note for speakers. Once the application you've come to speak on has been dealt with, you may leave the virtual meeting room. If you choose to remain, then please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You will not be allowed to participate further in the meeting from that point. Now, as you are aware, this meeting is being live streamed. The Council will make a recording for the purposes of preparing the minutes. Once the minutes have been approved by the committee, then this recording will be deleted. But please note that others may also record the live stream from the internet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the first application, which is NED/20/00506/TPO at Old Tupton. In line with our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning officers to tell us about any late comments, reports that have been produced, and for the planning manager to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. The meeting facilitator will share the presentation on screen. This means that I might find it difficult to see everyone. Therefore, I will allow the officers to complete their presentation and ask members to reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end. There'll be plenty of time for questions later. And we'll start with the planning officer, the case officer. I believe that's Alice.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Okay. Go to the first one. Thank you. This application is for the removal of 34 poplars covered by NEDDC TPO number 6 at Land North and to the north and west of the Poplars, Ankerbold Road, Old Tupton. This application was brought to Planning Committee in September, and it was requested at the time that the local planning authority commissioned a survey of the trees. AWA tree consultants carried out the survey in December 2020. AWA were only able to identify 34 poplars present at the site, 7 fewer than the 41 in the original application title. This was explained by the applicant as being due to the differences in survey methods, including the inclusion of trees that were already dead in their own survey, trees that have died since their survey, and other species. It was therefore agreed that this application title should be amended to apply to the remaining 34 poplars. The trees are located on the southern boundary of the site next to the dwellings known as the Poplars and the Gables. Come with the next slide, that's it. They are a strip of trees recorded as Area 1 on the TPO schedule. The area TPO runs from the road to the east for approximately 100 metres westwards, and it is approximately 20 metres wide. A hedge runs below the area of trees to the south and forms the boundary with the Poplars and the Gables. This hedge is not subject to the TPO, and indeed hedges cannot be subject to TPOs. The TPO protects trees which make a significant contribution to the amenity of the area. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So you can see the trees in this aerial photo, and you can see the poplars and the gables to the south of them. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of them taken from the field, which is now the development site. Next slide, please. This is a view of the trees from the north on Ankerbold Road. The trees are visually prominent when travelling from the north, although this will be reduced by the new housing which has been granted permission on this part of the site. Next slide, please. And this is the view from the south, if you're coming along Ankerbold Road from the south. And then the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I've got confused with my slides. Could you just go back one? Sorry. Thank you. The hedge on the boundary with the neighbouring properties partially hides the trees. And as mentioned above, this hedge is not covered by the TPO and is not part of this application. If you go to the next one, please. Thank you. The trees in this location have high public amenity value and make a positive contribution to the character of this part of Ankerbold Road. Next slide, please. The trees were surveyed by the applicant, and the area as a whole was classed as Category C, unsuitable for retention. It is therefore part of the landscaping plan for the site to remove these trees and replace them. Next slide, please. The AWA tree survey has backed up the recommendations of the applicant's survey. Whilst acknowledging the tree's amenity value, they say that most trees are in poor condition and decline, and they all have limited future prospects and limited long-term value. And you can see from this slide that there's a lot of dead wood in those trees. Next slide, please. The AWA survey is published on the Council's website, and the main findings included in the report for this meeting. But in summary, the AWA survey found that 27 of the trees are in particularly poor condition, with moderate to major dieback in their crowns, significant dead wood, and numerous significant snapped branches. 9 of these trees appear to have had their main stems snapped out completely, leaving a large proportion of their crowns absent. Next slide, please. 6 trees were in slightly better condition than the other trees, but these also have minor dieback, minor deadwood, and minor snapouts in their crown. 11 trees were found to have had bark wounds, cavities, and decays to their stems, and 2 had evidence of fungal infection, and 3 also have included bark unions to their main stems, which are more prone to failure. Most of the trees are leaning, with only 5 being vertical. 12 are leaning slightly, whilst 16 are leaning significantly. Next slide, please. Officers recognise that in the short term, there will be an impact on amenity and biodiversity during the works to remove the trees and the period during which the replacements are reaching maturity. Impact on biodiversity can be ameliorated by the work being carried out during the winter when birds are not nesting, and a condition can be imposed to ensure that the trees are replaced in the next planting season after felling. Further, the proposed mix of long-lived native species should, in the long term, provide a more diverse and long-lived variety of habitat, which in turn should be more supportive of biodiversity and will have a greater amenity value than the present single species situation. The next few slides just give you more of a feel of the condition and impact of the trees. So that's taken from Ankerbold Road, again from inside the site. And I think there's one more, and that's inside the site as well. The applicants have, the applicants have proposed replacing the poplars with 14 trees of a mixture of long-lived native species, including 3 field maple, 2 oak, 2 small-leaved lime, and then some shorter-lived species, that's 2 aspen and 5 birch. These will be located within the garden boundaries of plots A36 to A42 of the development, and due to their species mix will make a long-term positive contribution to the biodiversity and amenity of the area. These replacement trees will be protected under the area TPO, and their management will be included in the landscaping plan for the site. If this application is approved, the applicants will have to submit a Section 73 application to vary Condition 6 landscaping to incorporate the new scheme. Condition 7 of the 2018 permission to develop the site requires that any trees which within a period of 5 years from the completion of the development die, are removed or become seriously damaged or diseased shall be replaced in the next planting season. And these trees would be protected as part of that. Whilst it is recognised that the number of replacement specimens is considerably fewer than the 34 poplars they will replace, the choice of species, in particular the maple and oak, will grow to be shorter in height but wider in canopy than poplars. They are also of species which are considerably longer lived. It is therefore officers' opinion that the proposed replacements, suitably protected, will in time contribute positively to the amenity and biodiversity of the area. In making their recommendation to members, officers have considered the existing and future impact on amenity of the poplars, which, whilst contributing positive, are in a poor state of health, and we have weighed this against the immediate impact of felling and the long-term future impact of replacement trees on the amenity of the area. As a consequence of the declining condition of the trees and the suitability of the proposed replacement, officers are recommending that the short-term impact on amenity and biodiversity is outweighed by the long-term future positive impact on both amenity and biodiversity, and recommend that the application to fell these poplars be approved. Thank you, Chair.
I'm now going to invite the speakers to speak. As the clerk already explained, they will each have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Chair. I can't hear you very well. Is that the same for all members? Yeah,
Yeah, can't hear anything.
Members are nodding, Chair. May you try that again with your microphone slightly closer?
How's that? No?
No, I think I'm going to get some technical assistance into, if you could kindly speak as close to your microphone as possible. I'm going to send some assistance to the chamber.
How's that?
That's improved greatly.
Much better.
Okay, we'll carry on with this as best we can. So thank you, Alice. I'm going to invite the speakers to speak, and as the clerk has already explained, they will each have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised, but remember, your questions should only relate to the points which have already been made. If the technology fails us, we have asked them to send us in advance a written statement of their comments. Those that we have received have been included in the agenda supplement. And I know, Councillor Shipman, yours was a late request, so I'll put it over to you to start your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies that it was a bit last minute, but here we are. This application's just been daft from the get-go, to be honest, because in the first application that went in, the assessment said 5 trees needed to come out. The second assessment said 41 or whatever it was, and now this one's saying that the 41 trees don't even exist. Now, what's happened to the other trees? Because I don't believe that that 7 have died in the space of, you know, whatever it's been, 4 months. I think that needs actually looking at in its own right. The other thing for me is that there's obviously the amenity value of the trees there themselves. They act as a natural screening from the houses that are living next to it. 1.5 metre, 2 metre high hedgerow from them properties that are elevated next to it anyway is not going to be enough alone. Those trees provide adequate screening as things stand. Now, the other thing, and I believe it's the major issue here, and we say it all the time, is flooding. Now, I don't know if anyone's been down at that site recently, but you may have seen in the press recently, actually, that residents are being flooded all along that southern boundary, including where we're talking about with these trees. They are actually being flooded when it rains right now. And I don't think it's fair on them that an application like this is approved for those trees to be pulled out, especially when they scrape the whole site. They've scraped all the topsoil off the whole site. It's just going to cause additional problems for those residents down there. So I don't think good conscience, I can't support this application as it stands. If it was going to be approved, the trees that are replacing it need to be done as soon as possible after the trees are taken out. They should only be taken out once the drainage system, the full drainage system for the site has been installed, which they're currently working on now anyway on Anchorpole. But that's only part of it. They need to do the whole site, so it's actually draining water off the site as it should do onto the eastern side of Anchorpole Road, rather than how it is now, where, to be honest, the developers seem to be making it up as they go along. They really are causing havoc for residents around that southern part of that housing development. Now, obviously, we can't do anything about the houses. We're talking about the trees. We all know trees act as a natural sponge when water is in a certain area. So I don't see how removing 37 or whatever we've got left now is going to at all aid that situation. It's only going to make it worse. And I have to be here and argue for the residents that are down there that are having damage caused to their houses, you know, on a weekly
30
basis.
seconds remain.
And yeah, I just think that this application needs rejecting. But like I said, if members felt that it needed to go ahead, there certainly needs to be conditions on when those trees are pulled out, when the new ones are put back in, making sure the drainage system that they are installing is fully complete before the trees are pulled out, because I can see it causing problems for many years if it's not done properly.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any questions for Councillor Shipman? No?
No indications, Chair.
Got off lightly, Ross. Thank you. Okay.
Will Councillor Shipman now be removed from the meeting, Nikki?
Yes, Chair. I will leave now. That's
Okay.
not a problem. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Yeah.
you. There's no other speakers for this application, so I'm just going to throw the floor open for any comments. To planning officers, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's not very often I agree with Ross, but I have to say, you know, if for me personally, if they're taking 41 trees out, they put 41 trees back. You know, we looked at quite strictly on removing hedgerows and removing trees, and I agree with quite a few things that Ross had to say, particularly with the natural screening, particularly as the roots are a natural sponge. So removing 40 odd trees and only putting 7 or 8 back isn't where I sit happily with it. And again, also with the 2 metre hedgerow that's there as a screen, if they're going to remove the trees, then I'd like to see or ensure that we get a hedgerow back as well as the same amount of trees.
Excuse me, Chair, is this the stage now that you want to have members ask questions of the officers?
Yes, sorry. So I've got Councillor Liggett, then Councillor Armitage.
I've finished, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Liggett, Sherland Ward. I'm afraid I'm in agreement with Ross as well. As we had exactly the same thing happen to us. The building site, several hundred yards from us, the minute they took the topsoil off, we were flooded. They chopped approximately 30 trees down on there before they took the topsoil off, and we have been having problems ever since, even though the supposed flood defences have been put in. So I am in complete agreement with him. And I also, I do tree surgery myself, and I disagree strongly with only needing 14 replacement trees, and also the size of those 14 replacement trees. They are very small, and there are specialist firms, i.e. Hilliers of Winchester or even Derwent Treescapes, that can transport and move large trees with a huge root ball. You know, and if we're going to have to take these trees down, I'm sure the developers can afford to replace them with trees of virtually the same size, because it is possible. Thank you.
Thank you. William, have you got any questions, comments?
Yeah, it was a question to the officer, really. It was to do with the why there are some trees there which appear to be okay. All right, they may not be 100% and all the rest of it, but couldn't they be saved and allowed to thrive? Or is it something to do with building regulations whereby you can't build within, I think, 50 metres because of roots? I mean, surely this should have gone into, when the plan was originally done, you got the houses that are proposed right up to the side. I think if that had been the case, there wouldn't have been, nobody would have bothered about felling trees. But building regs say that if you got a poplar there, you've got to dig a trench something like 3 metres deep and 1 metre wide and fill it with concrete. So I just look at this and I think there's maybe, would you agree there's maybe an ulterior motive here?
I think that the application has been put in because of the condition of the trees, which has been backed up by the second survey that we have, as a council, have had done. So that's what we're looking at as the reason. That's the reasons that have been put forward, and that's the reasons that we've assessed it on.
I can just add to that, Chair, if I may, in response to some of the questions that have been put in. The consideration for members this afternoon, Chair, is that the primary issue, in fact, the only issue as far as I understand the guidance, is that the impact of the trees on the amenity of the area is the consideration, and therefore whether the proposal to remove them is justified having regard to the reasons and the information put forward in support of the application, Chair. That's the issue for members. So members need to consider the amenity of these trees and therefore whether the reasons put forward to remove them and the replacements proposed is acceptable. In terms of the issue that Councillor Elliott raised in response to some of the comments from Councillor Shipman, Chair, the matter about 41 out, 41 back, or 34 out, 34 back, whatever it may be, is addressed by officers in the report and on the various information that we have, Chair, and that the current situation with the trees is that they are all cramped together, and that's impacted on their development and the amenity value that they offer. So the 14 that are put back in is to seek to allow sufficient space for those 14 replacement trees to develop into appropriate and suitably sized species. In terms of the issue about flooding, we are aware as officers that there have been significant flooding issues with regard to the site. And as I say, I reiterate, Chair, that the issue for members is to assess the amenity of these trees and what value they have on the area and whether then their removal and replacement is acceptable or not. And just finally, Chair, in terms of the issue that Councillor Armitage made regarding building regulations, etc., I don't know whether that is the case or not, but normally even on sites where trees are present with suitable foundations and suitable standoff distances, development can take place in close association with trees. So without any evidence to that fact, Chair, I think it would be unwise to place significant weight on that issue that the trees are being removed for some other ulterior motive.
Thank you. But Councillor Hill, Councillor Reader, and then Councillor Armitage again. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with Councillor Elliott and Councillor Liggett. I see the reason for these trees to be removed if the disease, but I do think if we're looking at replacements, you don't want just whips that are being put in. You want substantial trees with substantial roots, and if the developer's got to pay to have them put in, then that's what we should ask or make as a condition, that they put substantial trees back in that are already growing and not just whips that can die off because of anything at all. But I'm not against the proposal. If the disease, they need to go. But I do think we need to have a look seriously what we put in the place.
Councillor Reader.
Thank you, Chair. I think I have to agree with Councillor Shipman. I think it's very concerning that we're thinking about this amount of trees being lost, and I agree with what Councillor Elliott's just said with regards to the issues around the flooding, and Councillor Liggett made the point as well. They are like a natural sponge which soak up the water, you know, and we've had issues around Claycross also with trees when they get removed and flooding. that occurs after that. So I do agree with those sentiments, but I also have to disagree slightly with Adrian at looking at just the amenity. I think we've also got to consider the benefit of trees environmentally as well. And yes, I get that there might be some trees that are showing disease, but the nature of ripping out lots and lots of trees together concerns me. And you've already indicated that there's a massive environmental and biodiverse impact on this. And I would have probably preferred to see more of a phased approach to removing those trees. And, you know, I did have a little chat with a parish councillor who's quite experienced in trees, much more than I am, just to get what he thinks around these trees. You know, and he made the point to me, you know, that canker it's not terminal. There are things that can be done. So I think there has to be questions about how the person that, you know, is responsible for the trees, how much they've looked after these trees. So my first question to the officer would be, under the TPO, how much responsibility has the owner got to ensure those trees are kept in a fit state? And obviously, whatever happens after these, what is going to secure the future of any future trees that are put in place as well? Because the last thing we would want is for any trees that are replaced for them to end up in a similar state to these trees that, you know, are not in such a good state now. Also, I think collectively they form a significant amount of amenity in terms of screening for the residents down there. You know, so it would need comprehensive screening and replanting to go back in there. So I do sort of agree, you know, that we need to be looking at making sure that the trees are replaced with trees that are mature enough to provide that stable and that screening, that the you know, it's not going to be a tree that's going to be, you know, broken or, you know, and it needs to be monitored as well. I think we also need to think about what Councillor Armitage was saying with regards to the roots of the trees. And again, when I was sort of trying to get some information about trees, because I'm not a tree expert by any means of the world, but he was saying, you know, sometimes the reason why developers might need the removal of populars trees is generally a shallow root would spread 3 times the height of the trees. Therefore, if the trees were a height of about 150 feet, then a root protection area would be needed of about 450 feet. So there's going to be issues around that. So I would have questions around, you know, what are the reasons that we really need these trees pulling out as they are. And I'm not saying, Chair, that I don't agree that if they're diseased, we need to be replacing, but I think a more phased approach and proper, you know, proper management of how they're removed would be better. Thank you, Chair.
Would you like to come back on any of those points, Chair?
Chair, can you hear?
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
We can now, Chair.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Off you go, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Just on some of those points that's been raised by Councillors Reader and Hill, Chair. The advice I've just given to members comes from the Planning Practice Guidance Note, which gives advice on what decision makers should take into account in considering applications for consent under a tree preservation order, and that's that the impact of the proposal on the amenity of the area is the consideration of whether the proposal is justified, bearing in mind the reasons and information put forward in support of it. And you've heard Alice earlier on and set out in the report the reasons why, in this case, the various pieces of advice that we've received had led to the conclusion that the removal of the trees and their replacement would be most appropriate. In terms of future protection, if you were minded to grant consent and require replacement trees, as Alice has mentioned, because the trees form part of an area tree preservation order, they would achieve protection under that order further to replacement. Regarding the replacements themselves, Chair, as Councillor Hill mentioned, the consideration always has to be height over longevity, because normally when the larger the trees that go in are, the lower they are, longer they take and therefore develop significant impact, whereas the smaller trees generally grow better and are more adapted to their surroundings. In this case, and perhaps as some members know, the height of 3 to 3.5 metres of the proposed standard trees replaced is seeking to strike a balance between those two elements, Chair. And finally, just in terms of, again, the root protection areas, Councillor Reader's made some points on that, Chair. I'm unable to contradict it, but I would reiterate that those issues would normally be addressed through building regulations in terms of how suitable foundations for new dwellings would be in such proximity to trees such as poplars, as in this case, Chair. But fundamentally, the issue for members to consider is the level of amenity of the trees on the area and whether the reasons put forward to support that proposal is overriding, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster, then Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Foster, member for Cole-Aston. Question for Mr. Kirkham, if we're still on questions. And it follows on from what Councillor Hill says, and a bit about what you've already explained. With regarding the replacement trees, I can see the heights 3 to 3.5 metres for most, and the girths, which are 10 to 12 centimetres. And you've explained, I think, in so many words that these are the optimum size tree because of how quick they'll grow at this size. Do we have any other options as regards, not as in, I understand the quantity of trees and the sort of trees that there are, and that you won't necessarily want to replace them with 34 trees. So I can understand that number. But when it comes to the size of those trees, do we have any options? I take your point about them growing better if they're that size, but are there other options? Do other people have other planning committees ask for bigger trees to be put in? Are bigger trees often planted? Can they be planted? So do we have any options to plant much bigger trees, even though they might not grow as well, but people can have the big trees they want from the start? Thanks.
I'll come back first of all, Chair, if I may. Alice, who's perhaps a bit more knowledge on this issue than myself, may want to add something at the end, but the options for members are, first of all, you can refuse the application if you don't feel the reasons put forward to justify the removal of the trees is sufficient and the trees do offer a level of amenity value you wish to see retained. That's the first option. If you're minded to approve the scheme, so the removal of all the proposed trees, then the options are for you to require more or different replacement trees in terms of height or size or species. That is within the gift of the Planning Committee, Chair. As Councillor Foster's mentioned, as officers, we believe the balance between future amenity value and growth and speed of that growth and adaptivity of the new trees to the surroundings, it's seeking to strike that balance, we believe, as officers. But if members were minded to seek taller trees, then you can plant, as Councillor Liggett's alluded to earlier, Chair, there are taller trees than standards. Alice may know the specifics of that, but yes, you could seek taller trees. So as I say, they tend to generally take not as well and longer than the smaller ones, but the whips, obviously at only a few centimetres high, are a lot smaller, but tend over time, but I'm talking years rather than weeks and months, tend to provide better future growth over a longer term period. I hope that helps, Chair, as answering Councillor Foster's question.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage, then Councillor Liggett.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. It's really just to point out about planting trees. I lived for many years next door to Dolby Forest, and I used to follow how the Forestry Commission went about planting trees. You don't put single trees in like that. How they do it, they put plenty in, and then after 10 years, they thin them. If you just put an odd tree in, they'll blow over. You get wind blow. You have to be careful about thinning in any case, because you have to be it has to be done very carefully, because you could also create a wind tunnel and you'll get wind blow just the same. If we're talking about routes and route protection areas, then I think the officers ought to be minded and ought to check building regulations about building next to poplars and also trees, and checking the route protection area, because they obviously don't really realise the implications when you start building next to poplars. And this should have been realised when they approved the plans of these houses, which were right up next to the poplar trees. But this was obviously an afterthought, and that's why I still maintain that's why they want these trees removed. There may be some of them which are diseased. Well, take some of them out and replace them. But what's the point having a TPO if you're wanting to fell trees left, right and centre? Let's have them replaced. Put twice as many in if need be, and then thin. You thin them out. You put things like oaks in. An oak will live for 300 years. Who's going to look after? Where's the management team going to be in 300 years? There may not be about if it's a limited company in 3 years, let alone for 300. And these are my worries. And I think it's an ill-devised plan, this wrong variety of trees, and just destroying them basically because of the roots. It's not so much damage. It's to do with the rules and building regulations.
Yeah, if I may come in regarding the points that Councillor Armitage has said regarding the motive. I think you need to disregard that. To be honest, I think that may well be the case. However, you need to consider the application on the basis of the reason for the application to remove the trees. You cannot decide yourself that the motive for the removal of the trees is anything other than the amenity of the area, and it would be very dangerous for you to make a decision on your belief that the motive is anything other than the amenity of the area. Also, whilst I'm talking, I think it may be worth pointing out to members that if you don't approve this application and eventually the tree is considered to be dead or dangerous, then the applicants can remove whatever tree is dead or dangerous without any need to apply for permission from the local authority. So there's a risk that if he does that, we cannot then require them to put a replacement tree where he's removed a dead or a dangerous tree.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Liggett?
Yeah, just getting back to size of trees. If we're talking bare-rooted trees, then fair enough, 3 metres. But I'm not talking about bare-rooted. I'm talking about proper tree with a proper root ball that has been transported by a proper company. And I mean, you've only got to look at Chelsea, and we've all seen large trees in those gardens that are moved several times, and they do survive. If they've got a decent root ball on, they will survive. So that's all I want to make a comment on. Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions for the officers? No? Okay. Right, perhaps we'll open the floor for proper debate now. We seem to have covered most of it. Has anyone got anything further they'd like to add? Councillor Foster, Councillor Potts?
Yeah. For myself, when this came last time to the planning committee, I took the word of our parks officers that went round and assessed these trees, and I could see the point in the trees being taken down, and also with them being replaced by appropriate replacements. So I could see that from the start. For me, so last time that was my position. The last time we knocked it back because we were all happy here to go away and spend money, or get the council to spend money on a further report, because we doubted the officers recommendations last time. No, not the planning officers, but the officers that went to see the trees and gave the report. We've since had a report which more or less confirms the same by AWA. I'm not sure if we paid for that or the applicants paid for that, so that I don't know. So now I feel like twice now I've been told that these trees need cutting down. There are replacements, and I've questioned the size of the replacements, and we've had a recommendation there as well. Now, unlike other people on this committee, I'm definitely no expert in trees, but I'm happy to trust the opinions that I've been given. I've been given them twice now. And lastly, Jim Fieldsend's point about the applicant being able to cut the trees down anyway without being required to replace them. There's now 2 reports here in front of the planning committee, and both of those say that these trees are diseased and need to be cut down. If I were the applicant, I'd be thinking, well, I can just cut these trees down now. So we might want these trees to stay up, but what's to stop this person, this applicant, cutting these trees down now? So for me, it's clear. It's clear as day to me on this one. I don't find this one hard at all. I know we're not proposing any motions at the minute, but you know, I'm in favour of following recommendations from the officer. Yeah, it's as clear as that.
Thank you. Councillor Potts, then Councillor Powell and Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I wasn't at the meeting where this came. I think it was September time. So this one I'm coming to it new, but I'm beginning to wonder why we ask for specialist reports if we're going to totally disregard what they say, in much the same vein as Councillor Foster there. I think if we do nothing, it's clear both reports have said that most of the trees are coming to the end of their natural life. If we do nothing, we'll end up without any trees there at all. I'm happy when a proposal's made, I will vote for officer recommendation on this. The only thing I would say is I think when the officer read a report out, she said that 6 of the trees were in reasonable condition. So I would put an amendment in there to see if we could actually save those 6 trees. But in terms of officer recommendation, yeah, that's what I will be supporting today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. At the last time that we looked at this, we cast doubt on one of our officers who came in for a certain degree of criticism, which I thought was very disappointing. We've now had an independent report, which we called for, and it has confirmed largely what that original officer said. I think we should apologise to that officer, to be honest, but that's just an aside. But that's how I feel about it. As far as this is concerned, it seems quite simple to me. We asked for another opinion. We've got it. What is the point, as Councillor Foster says, of asking experts for an opinion and then saying, we know better than them? Because that's really what we're doing. We're all, you know, some people are professing, I don't know anything about trees, but, and then giving a view. I think we should take the independent recommendation and the independent report at face value. And I would rather see a managed tree system here rather than one where maybe the odd one will be cut down by the developer as and when he or she thinks fit. We need a proper management plan, and that's what we get if we vote for the officer's recommendation, which I will be doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I have to say I agree totally with Councillors Potts, Foster and Powell. I'd much rather see this as a managed state and trees that are going to survive and look well for many years to come. The only thing I would question is something of the size of them, whether we could look at adding some slightly larger trees to that, and whether that's something that could be conditioned. But other than that, I also will be supporting this this motion.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. As well as Jim Field's point about the applicant being able to cut the trees down anyway and not replace them, this can also, and it's not always a consideration of mine, not always, this could easily go to appeal. It could end up costing the council money when we've not followed these recommendations by officers, and 2 reports, one by our own tree surgeons and another one which is an independent one which we've requested. So this could quite easily be overturned. So for me, I don't want to sound too challenging when I say this, but if we look at those, because I'm a big fan of trees and I'm a big fan of planting them, and anybody that knows me knows that, what I've been involved with before. But if you look at those people that are minded to not grant this application to fell those trees, on what grounds do we have out there? What policies have we got out there that can actually justifiably stop this? If you're thinking of putting a motion to stop this going ahead, what policies? You might want the trees to be there. It might be flooding. We've got to have some sort of policy there, and we've got to follow policy at the end of the day. If there's something there, somebody can persuade me, other than what I've heard so far from officers and experts. If there's something in our local plan, our adopted one, or the next local plan, if there's something there which says that we can knock this back, I'd be happy to hear it and listen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Liggett, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Armitage.
Thank you. I'm not disagreeing with officer recommendations. What I am disagreeing with is the amount that's being replanted and the size. If the amount can be upped because of natural dying, which you will get, and if we could have a few large trees so that there's still that amenity there and the water drinking capabilities of a larger tree. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I completely agree with most of the things I've heard, and I do agree with Councillor Foster. When I first put in about that I agreed with Ross on the use of the roots for sucking up the water and so on. Ankerbold Road has always been a flood risk area on the other side of the road anyway. So taking trees out to me makes no sense. However, I stick by what I said about I'd like to see the same amount put back, but I will quite happily move officer recommendation, but with the conditions that we do get more trees back. And I also agree that we've had 2 reports, and both of those reports are absolutely right. What's the point in taking a report and then ignoring the advice from an expert? The thing that I don't quite get is, if some are seriously diseased, I have no issue with them taking them out. If they're a safety risk or a hazard to either a building or the public, I have no problem at all taking those out. But when I heard originally that some of these were just minor and some had bark indentations, as a non-expert, I question why we're taking those out that aren't seriously diseased or with bark indentations to them. But I will happily move recommendation with the conditions that we get more trees back.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage, then Councillor Hill.
I agree with Councillor Elliott. We do need more trees. You can't leave so many of these big tall trees because you'll get wind blow and they're going to come down first gale, because the trees in the forest sort of shield each other. You leave one standing like that and it won't last 10 minutes. As soon as you get a first gale, it'll come down. So you've got to do a clear fell and then plant enough trees to take. At this 14, well, no, I can't agree with that. We want more trees. And let's put back like with like as regards numbers and put some big decent trees in to alleviate the flooding problems. And on those conditions, I will go with officer's recommendation.
May I come back, Chair, when it's appropriate, please?
Again, I think it's this mic's going mad. Councillor Hill?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with other speakers that with Councillor Elliott and Councillor Foster. I have no concerns about voting yes for this, but I am concerned about the size of the trees and how many. And I'd just like to ask, as an aside, what about the hedge? Is the hedge ancient hedge? Because if it is, there's a law against touching it. You know, and I just wonder whether that's been looked at. I don't want to throw cat amongst pigeons. I'm quite willing to vote for officers' recommendation for this, but with the conditions that's been stated about how many trees and the size of them.
Thank you. Adrian?
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to just 1 or 2 points there. First of all, to avoid any doubt, the survey that was done by AWA was at the request and direction of the council. It wasn't done any direction of the applicant, so it was managed by ourselves and paid for by the council as well. Just in terms of the 6 trees that have been mentioned that are in a slightly better than the others, they're the ones I believe that are mentioned at the top of page 21, but even those trees, they're only in a slightly better condition, and they also, according to AWA, have minor dieback, minor deadwood and minor snap out, so they're not anywhere near perfect. Just in terms of replacements, Chair, I fully understand the comments that members are making, and condition 2, as it stands as proposed, would require the replacement scheme as per the information in your packs. If you were minded to approve the scheme, Chair, subject to amendment to that in terms of numbers and size as in the discussion, then that could be amended to require a scheme to be submitted to and approved by the council. But it would be my view that in view of the current state of the trees that are in that area, that it would be inappropriate to require 41 or even 34 replacements. But if members were otherwise minded to support the recommendation, then that condition could be altered to require a scheme that may prove closer to members' wishes than the one that's been submitted. And just finally, Chair, on the issue of the hedge, the proposal is only seeking to do works to the trees. There's no intention to have any impact on the hedge. As Councillor Hill notes, in circumstances, hedges do retain protection, although where they form boundary to residential property, they don't have that protection. But currently, there's no proposals to alter the hedge. And again, subject to anything Alice may say, I am of the view that that hedge is to be retained as part of the wider landscaping scheme for the site. So there's no intention for that hedge to be removed. Certainly not as part of this application, but I believe it would be retained in any case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, Chair, if I may, I did move recommendation. Now Adrian's come up with that amendment for the planting, I'll quite happily move it.
Sorry, Chair, as I understood at this stage, Councillor Elliott, you're indicating that that's what you would do when the Chair had opened up the floor to motions. So,
oh, sorry, I thought we had.
No, as I understand it at the moment, there's no motion before committee, just an indication that people will move motions along those lines.
Right, I thought I'd made the motion providing with the amendments.
Are you comfortable with that, Chair, that at the moment the floor is yet to be opened up for motions?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Foster and Councillor Potts with asked to come in.
Thanks, Chair. I think this came to us before in September. I think while we've been knocking this backwards and forwards, we've already missed one growing season. So I think that's probably worth bearing in mind when we're making decisions about when we want these trees planted. We've already done that. Also, when it comes to us deciding what trees we want, I think we're all going to be careful because I don't know much about trees. I'm not going to know how many trees we want to put down on this list. You know, I'm looking at that table from field maple to aspen to, I know what an oak looks like, but I don't know the difference between a field maple and a lime. Somebody might. I don't know how many more trees we're going to request and of what type. It's all a bit, that's why I'm happy to listen to people that know about trees and put a tree plan forward. If there's anybody here knows enough to actually increase one of these trees or another tree and where to put them, you know, I'm happy to follow that. But I think that's a bit difficult at the minute.
Okay. Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my point was about the suggestion of putting in extra trees. Are you going to squash them in the same area length that the trees are occupying at the moment, or are you planning to increase the length of the tree line? Because different species of trees have different growing requirements. They grow at different rates to different heights. They have different canopy widths. So if we're talking, we've already had the officers explained that that the type of trees and the number of trees is designed to give them the maximum and best start in life and to ensure the long-term prosperity. So when we're talking about extra trees, can we just have some clarification as to whether we're going to plant more in that same length, or whether you're suggesting that that tree line be somehow extended? Because if we're going to cram them all in, surely they're going to be overgrown, they're going to be a tangled mess, and we're probably going to end up with diseased trees, and in a few years to come maybe we'll be having this conversation again. So if somebody could just clarify that proposal for me, please.
Thank you. Alice, and then Councillor Powell.
Just to let you know, Chair, under the regulations for tree preservation orders for areas, we cannot condition trees to be planted outside of the existing area. So that's that about 100 metre by 20 metre strip that I showed you on the plan. We can't condition any trees outside of that in this situation.
Just to add one point to that, Chair, if I may, the comments that members will have seen first last September and now in the current report on page 13, members I'm sure will have noted that Parks officers have commented on the proposed replacement scheme and have given the view that the space afforded to the trees, as Councillor Potts has just mentioned, and would allow them to establish naturally, and when they become mature, will potentially cause less problems to nearby properties in any case. So the Parks officers have already suggested that the submitted scheme for replacement is appropriate, so members may wish to bear that in mind in their considerations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Powell, and then I will open the floor because I think we've done this to death.
Yeah, so do I. I think I'll go back to my original point about expertise. And what Adrian has just said has sort of coalesced it as far as I'm concerned. What's the point of having experts? What's the point of asking their opinion and then us, let's face it, as amateurs, going against them? I would certainly support the officer's recommendation. If there is a rider to that the officer is delegated to talk again to the developer, perhaps about a few more trees, but not many. I think that might be a way out of our impasse. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to open it for motions now, and I believe Councillor Elliott, you put one forward. We'll start with you.
I did, Chair. I'm quite happy to move it, and I agree with Councillor Powell as well. If we can leave that with Adrian to amend it to get some more trees planted in there, and we're not talking about planting outside the TPO 100 metres. Quite happy to go with that anyway. That affords us the screen that's already mature and there.
Okay, have I a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
So the motion there then, Chair, is to move officer recommendations subject to further
Councillor Armitage seconding it, I believe, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah. So move officer recommendations subject to further discussions about the planning manager with the developer in terms of the possible addition of some more trees along those lines,
Chair,
was it?
If that were accepted by members, Chair, that would require a slight amendment to condition 2, so not accepting the current proposals for a replacement, but requiring that to be submitted and approved by ourselves subsequent to any decision. Although, bearing in mind the point that Councillor Foster has made, that would inevitably lead to some delay in the potential replanting, probably until the next planting season.
Okay. All right. Are you happy with that, Councillor Elliott? Councillor Armitage?
Well,
yes, Chair, I'm happy with that.
If we want numbers, could we say 20 trees? It's just 6 extra.
I think, Chair, specifying numbers without knowing species and details doesn't leave officers a great deal of consideration or
Okay.
You can always
with
think
others who may know more about this, Chair, but again, that's for members to decide. But my recommendation would be to require a suitable scheme of replacement and replanting, and we'll, as officers, speak to the developer and colleagues as to whether we can get more than 14 in. It may actually be a matter of getting some of the other species that the parks officers talked about, some of the smaller species, hawthorn, perhaps hazel, that have been mentioned in their comments, Chair.
I'm happy with that, Chair.
My recommendation would not be to specify a number.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott's okay with that. Are you okay with that, Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, Chair, that's approve officers' recommendations, but with the requirement that a suitable scheme of replacement and replanting should be agreed?
Yes. Can we have a vote on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll conduct the vote by roll call. If you can clearly say for, against or abstain on the proposals put. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hill.
For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader.
For.
Councillor Rouse. For. And Councillor Ruff.
For. Thank you all very much. We can move
Thank you,
on.
Chair. That's carried.
Thank you. Can move on to the next application, which I believe is the one for Holy Moor side. So that's NED/20/0151/FL. And I believe you're the case officer, Adrian.
I'll introduce it, Chair, if I may. Sue is in the room with us if clarification needed on any specific points. After I've introduced the application, Chair, I'll go through the slides as normal. And in this instance, Chair, the application seeks to retain a partially constructed agricultural building at Holy Moor side. It measures approximately 12 metres by 12 metres. There's an overall height to eaves of 4 metres. It's intended to construct the building as a replacement for 4 existing chicken sheds, which we'll see on the photographs in a second. Permission has been granted, Chair, in 2020 for a building on the site. The building, the subject of this application, is rotated 90 degrees to that approved. There's 4 roof lights, and it's very slightly further south than the one that has been approved back in 2020. Otherwise, Chair, it's exactly the same as that already permitted, which establishes the fallback position, which is a factor material to your decision this afternoon. At yesterday's site visit, Chair, it was queried why roof lights were not proposed in the as approved structure. Officers, Chair, don't have exact information on why that change has taken place, but we are advised now that roof lights are required for animal welfare reasons. The site, Chair, is located in the Greenbelt, where agricultural buildings are acceptable and appropriate development. The reasons set out in the report, Chair, the design of the building is considered to be acceptable. Impact on the landscape is also considered acceptable, and no important views as set out in the neighbourhood plan would be damaged or affected. The building, Chair, is over 42 metres to the boundary with the nearest residential property and even further from the dwellings themselves. In the opinion of officers, this will ensure no unacceptable impact is caused to neighbouring amenity. There aren't any technical reasons, Chair, to refuse the application, hence the officer recommendation for approval. And if I can just ask Nikki now to run through the presentation for members. Thanks, Nikki. The application site, Chair, outlined in the lighter colour. You can just see an existing building within that area. That's roughly where the proposed building would be located. If you just move on, Nikki, please. This slide, Chair, shows the proposed building in red and black at the centre of the red-lined area, and the approximate position of the 4 chicken sheds that would be removed from the site are shown hatched, and you can see those on the drawing, Chair. The measurements also show that the building is, say, just in excess of 42 metres from the boundary with the residential property to the south, and approximately 30 metres from the track leading to the farm to the west. Thanks, Nikki. Just showing the details, Chair, as I said, building 4 metres 2 eaves and just in excess of 12 metres by 12 metres square in terms of floor area. You can see the 4 roof lights in profile there. Thanks, Nikki. And other elevations, Chair. Thank you. This is one of the photographs that's referred to in the Officer Committee report, Chair, showing the existing situation with regards to the removal of the eggs from one of the sheds. Thanks, Nikki. And now, Chair, the application building is that on the very left of this photograph, and in the foreground on the right, you can see one of the existing sheds that would be removed from the site should the building gain approval and be occupied. Just in the far distance, the white house with the grey roof is the nearest residential property. And as I say, the distance from the building to the hedge is just in excess of 42 metres. And ask members to bear that in mind as we get to the end of this element of the presentation, because as requested yesterday, we have included in the presentation photographs submitted in representations from that property, which members will need to assess in their deliberations. But as I say, the distance from the building to that hedge is 42 metres, just in excess of 42 metres, then further to the property itself. Thanks, Nikki. This is the building from closer to the farm complex buildings. And again, you can see the property in the background, the white property, the nearest residential property. And just in the middle left of the photograph, the tree line, the hedge line there is the location of the public footpath that's referred to. And we'll see again towards the end, some photographs taken in the other direction from that footpath. Thanks, Nikki. And this is taken from closer to the main Chesterfield to Baslow Road, close to the access into the site. So the main farm buildings are off to the left, and in the foreground, 2 of the buildings that would be removed, and the application building in the centre of the photograph. Thanks, Nikki. And this is a similar photograph but taken from the access track to the farms. This is taken from the west, looking at the application building. Thank you. And similarly, again, you can see existing buildings in the foreground, application building centre left. Thank you. This is a photograph taken from the footpath, as I've mentioned. Various photographs now as submitted in representations, which were submitted in opposition to the application. The application building is clear there in the centre of the photograph. And the access track to the farm, where we've just seen some other photographs, is located along the tree line in the beyond the building. Thanks, Nikki. This is taken from residential property to the south and east. Thank you. And then, Chair, as members requested yesterday, these are the photographs submitted in representation from the nearest property. That's the white property I've made reference to on 1 or 2 occasions, and that's the structure being constructed. You can see the chicken sheds in the middle distance, just this side of the metal structure that's going up. Thank you, Nikki. And again, Chair, and similarly. Thank you. And this again is now got a roof on, and you can see the hedge line in the near distance is the boundary of that residential property. So from that boundary to the building is the 42 metres I keep on referring to. Thanks, Nikki. And then finally, Chair, just again, the final slide that's been submitted in representation from the opposition, the opponents of the application, Chair. That's all in the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, Chair, we just can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions for clarification at this point? Just one, and then we're going to move on to the speakers. Councillor Foster?
Yeah, a question for Mr. Kirkham. It's just a bit of clarity between 7.1, where it says in the neighbourhood plan, It echoes national policy relating to the Greenbelt, where development will only be permitted in very special circumstances unless it is considered not appropriate. As an agricultural building, the development is not appropriate development in the Greenbelt. And yet we've got in 8.1, it's not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, and planning policies are generally supportive of justified agricultural development in the countryside. It's a working farm. So just a bit of clarity between those two positions, the 7.1 and the 8.1. They just look a little bit, I know they're two different plans. One's our own local plan and one's the neighbour plan. But if you could just explain the difference between those, please.
Just a point of clarity from Councillor Foster, Chair. First of all, at paragraph 7.1, it states, as an agricultural building development is not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. And I think that mirrors what Councillor Foster said later on. So I'm not sure I'm following the element of clarity that's needed, Chair.
My apologies, Chair. It's me reading not inappropriate and all the rest of it, so my apologies.
Thank you.
I'm pleased about that, Chair.
We've got one speaker, and that's the agents, that's Charlotte Stainton. And I will remind you that they've got 3 minutes to give their presentation. Hello, Charlotte.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Adam's Happy Hens is a local free-range egg business with a popular farm shop that has been important for many people during lockdown. Adam is the third generation of his family working the farm, and he's passionate about its future. In August last year, the council granted planning permission for a chicken shed. Due to a mix-up, the building does not match exactly with the approved plans. Adam apologised and stopped work. There are 3 differences between the 2 schemes. The building has its ridgeline east-west instead of north-south. 4 translucent roof panels have been added for natural light, which the architect missed off the original plans by mistake. The building is in a slightly different position, but the building is the same size as the one approved last year. We ask you to focus your decision, please, on whether the 3 differences would result in any greater impact than the approved building. The objections are not about the changes, but about the building being there at all. The main objector bought their house after the original planning permission was approved. The building is almost 43 metres from the neighbour's garden and is only visible because the applicant kindly cut the hedges at the neighbour's request. The photos you've seen are zoomed in. The building is square, so changing the orientation of the roof has not changed the length of the building as viewed from the neighbours. Instead, it has changed what would have been a gable end to a sloping roof. As you know, private views are not a material consideration. The chicken shed will replace 4 wooden sheds. 2 of these are nearer to the neighbours. The existing sheds are old and do not have sufficient height to allow good airflow or to allow a tractor in for cleaning out. The timber buildings increase the chances of red mite, they are a fire risk, their outside water pipes keep freezing, and they need cleaning out more often, making it very muddy. The mud around the 4 buildings and their old design is making egg collection, feeding and caring for the chickens difficult and is churning up the whole field. Because of bird flu regulations, all birds must currently be kept inside, and Adam is very keen to get them in the new building to significantly improve their air quality and give them a bit more space. There are significant operational and animal welfare reasons for needing the new building. Your planning policies fully support an essential agricultural building. As you know, this is a working landscape.
30 seconds remain.
The building has no greater impact than the one already approved. You could refuse permission today and Adam would have to spend money turning the building 90 degrees. But what would this achieve? We ask you please to support this hardworking local farmer to complete the building and give his hens the best possible quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? Oh, Councillor Elliott?
Sorry, Chair, it wouldn't unmute for me. Technology. Chair, I just did want to ask Charlotte what and I agree. I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference spinning it round and costing money for that. I just wanted to ask what the original roof height was, not to the eaves, because I know that's 4 meters. Has it changed much in the roof height, the ridge height from the original application?
No, the ridge height has not changed and the eaves height has not changed. The actual size of the building itself has not changed at all. It's just changed in orientation.
Yeah, well, I know you said it was just a little bit off where it was supposed to be developed on, and I think that's only a couple of meters after reading all the bump on it. So thanks, Charlotte.
That's
fine.
correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you, Charlotte, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open the floor for debate. Oh no, first, are there any questions to the actual planning officer? No. Okay, the floor is open for debate. And I've got to say, if you followed the application on the website, I've never seen so many people in supportive of this. I think it's a great idea. But there we go. Anybody, any comment?
Yeah, can I come in, Chair?
Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, I think it's a well-designed building. We passed it before when it was in its original place. They just, well, I don't really know what went wrong. A mistake on the part of the builder. And as far as animal welfare, yeah, you've got to have a tall building to get the airflow. I presume it's a deep litter shed, and as a result, you do get quite a lot of ammonia and what have you being created. And I myself, you know, I would go with officer's recommendation, but you're not ready for that yet, are you?
Not yet. Any other comment? Any other comment? Councillor Potts?
Just a quick one, and I've probably missed the opportunity to ask this to the appropriate person. But I just wondered if there will be any more chickens kept in that shed, or if it is just to house the ones that the existing 4 smaller sheds house.
I don't know.
Yeah, sadly, I don't. I don't know either, Chair. I'm afraid I don't know whether Sue's able to advise, but my understanding was it was to accommodate existing chickens in a more appropriate environment. But Sue will be able to confirm that to Chair.
Yes, Chair, I did ask the question when we were dealing with the application. I was told that there's no intention to intensify the use. It's simply for the existing chickens.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, if I, as probably one of the only qualified people to speak on this, DEFRA have specifications for what you can keep and how many square meters per bird and this sort of thing. And no doubt their people will come along and inspect in the same way that, you know, we get environmental health in this, in our profession. But they have strict guidelines and people have to adhere to them.
Thank you. Any other comment? No. Okay, shall we move for a motion? Has anyone got a motion to put forward?
Yes, I'll put one forward. I propose that we go along with officer's recommendation and that we approve this.
And I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. We'll take a vote on it. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. As before, you're voting for, against or abstain. If you could clearly indicate when I call your name. Councillor Armitage?
For.
Councillor Cooper?
For.
Councillor Elliott?
For.
Councillor Foster?
For.
Councillor Hill?
For.
Councillor Liggett?
For.
Councillor Potts?
For.
Councillor Powell?
For.
Councillor Reader?
For.
Councillor Rouse?
For.
And Councillor Ruff?
For.
That's a unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. We can move on to application number 3, which is NED/20/00979/FL, change of use of a stable block and tractor store. Adrian, is this the one you're leading with?
Yes, I'm leading on this one, Chair. Thank you. This application, as you just pointed out, Chair, seeks to convert a former stable building and a tractor store, along with creating a link extension to form a single dwelling. The stable chair was granted planning consent in 2005, whilst the tractor store obtained consent in 2016 to support the nearby Peak Edge Hotel. The site chair is located in the countryside with clear views of the site from the local highway and public footpath networks, and we'll see some photographs of that in a second. Both buildings, Chair, currently exhibit a simple design, and to deliver the conversion, it's proposed to reface the buildings in stone and timber cladding and introduce, in the opinion of officers, significant and character-changing openings. Development plan policies, Chair, both local and neighbourhood planners, do allow for the conversion of buildings, but subject to them being capable of conversion without major alteration, adaptation and reconstruction, and without an unacceptable impact on the area. Officers are of the view, Chair, that the extent of change proposed, along with a significant number of new and altered openings, are major alterations, and so the proposal will not be compliant with the policies set out in the development plan. The buildings, Chair, are currently simple in appearance, and we'll see that in the photographs in a second, and it's considered that the changes proposed would dilute their simple form and character, and so unacceptably impact the area. In addition, Chair, the large amount of glazing is likely to introduce significant levels of lighting contrary to policy AP19 of the neighbourhood plan regarding dark skies. Coupled to this, Chair, and as set out in the report, is the impact of the extensive garden that would be formed and be associated with any new dwelling, and the impact this would have on the rural character of the area. In conclusion, Chair, officers consider that the level of change proposed to the buildings and the area generally is unacceptable, contrary to the policies of your development plan, and hence the recommendation to refuse the application. Thanks, Nikki. Just have the first slide, please. The application site, Chair, is the orange area with the access onto the Chesterfield to Matlock Road, which is the road that runs along the right side of the slide. The road to the north of the top of the slide, the north, is the road that then follows on to Two Dales and Darley Dale. The Peak Edge Hotel complex is the area at the upper left of the photograph. Thanks, Nikki. The application site, Chair, outlined in red with the applicant's other land holdings in blue. As I've just said, the access to the Chesterfield Matlock Road, you're able to see that along the top edge of the access track and the application site, and then towards Peak Edge Hotel, is a public footpath. Thanks, Nikki. The site as it stands, Chair, is occupied by the two buildings with an area of hard standing. Again, we'll see that in a second in the photographs. The application site is part of, well, half of that area that's in grey there, with the lower half presumably retaining its use as meadow or generally grassed area. Thanks, Nikki. The application, Chair, retains the buildings but adds that linking the two buildings together. That's a glazed link, and we'll see that on the drawings at the next slide. Thanks, Nikki. This is the existing buildings. The two buildings, the stables, which is the lower of the two, and the tractor shed, which is the larger of the two. Just to point out to members as we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see the difference between the openings in the structures as they are at the moment and those that are proposed. So if you just go back, Nikki, just one. You'll be able to see that there's the large opening in the tractor shed and the openings on the stable, and then there's a single opening on the rear elevation of the stable at the top of the slide. And then if you just go on one now, you can see that the building, for example, the tractor shed has floor to top of apex of roof glazed openings. It's got new openings in the elevations, all other than the rear elevation. And the building would be reclad rather than the blockwork and sheeting as stands at the moment, with the stone and the timber cladding, as you can see on the drawing. So as we go through the slides, just if you can bear in mind the level of openings that are proposed, and particularly the glazing that's proposed on this elevation that's facing us now. And in this slide, the application buildings are at the centre right of the photograph. There's the larger tractor store, which is the green upper area, which is the sheeting, and then the stable building to its left. The building on the far left is the Peak Edge Hotel complex. And just beyond the application site, you can just see the cars that are travelling along the Darley Road. This photograph is taken from Belland Lane, which is to the west of the application site. And the next one, Nikki, is a closer up shot of this, which then shows the building. So many of these photographs are taken from the applicant's own submissions, Chair, so it's all available information on the portal. This shows a closer up view of those buildings. The tractor shed on the right, and you can see what in officers' opinion is a very simple agricultural style building with limited openings. That's just the one opening in the front elevation. The stable on the left has got the openings in the elevation that's facing us, but just for example, on the stable building, that end elevation would be all glazed. Thanks, Nikki. This is taken from the Darley Road. This is the back of those buildings, and you can see the tractor shed on the left, and you can see the existing stable on the right with a single rear opening in that elevation. The photograph we've just seen is from towards those dwellings that you can see in the distance. Thanks, Nikki. And a closer up shot of that. Thank you. And a couple of photographs, Chair, the site access. This is taken in the direction of Chesterfield. And then if you can go on one, Nikki, please. And that's in the Matlock direction. And the public footpath runs along this track towards the application site. Thanks, Nikki. And that's just looking from the entrance, the building that occupies the view in the beyond the site entrance, which we're standing on across the road. Thanks, Nikki. Looking in the other direction, this is now looking back towards the site. You can see the public footpath signpost on the right-hand side there. The access track leads towards the two buildings. Thanks, Nikki. And that's further along that track. You can just begin to see the tractor shed in the distance now through those trees. Thanks, Nikki. This is taken from the southern extent of the application site. The area in the foreground before the post rail fence will be retained as grassland, with the area beyond that being garden to serve the new dwelling. But again, you can see the buildings in the middle right, with the bottom of those, the blockwork being refaced in stone, with the upper area being clad in wood boarding. Just on the left here is the existing property, Myrtle Grove. Thanks, Nikki. There's a view from the eastern element of the site, again looking back towards the tractor shed. Thanks, Nikki. This is an area that would be used as garden, and you can see the Darley Road just beyond the stone boundary wall in the far distance. And this is the other element of concern that officers have. The area in the foreground will become garden, with the use as garden that would contain all the trappings that would be associated with that, and the concern officers have with regards to the impact of that on the current character of the area. Thanks, Nikki. You can just see the tractor shed in the far right here. This is looking across the application site. The garden would be retained this side of the timber post and rail fence. Thanks, Nikki. And this closer up shot, similar we've seen previously. You can just cast your minds back to the proposed details, which show, for example, on the front elevation of the tractor shed, that current opening being glazed, with the glazing then extended up to the apex of the roof, and the same on the front of the stable building. Thanks, Nikki. This is looking from the east of the application site towards the tractor shed. Thank you. And similarly. Thanks, Nikki. And I think this may be the final one. That's a close-up of the front elevations that are proposed. I think that may be it, Nikki. If you just go on one. And again. And again. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any points needed for clarification before I ask the speakers? Councillor Cooper?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to check, have these buildings ever actually been used for their intended purpose? I know they've not been up that long, but they don't look in a bad condition at all. So just checking really to see if they've ever been used for their intended purpose.
I'm unable to answer that question, Chair. Unfortunately, I don't know the details of the building's use. I can tell you that as I just mentioned, the stables was granted consent back in 2005. The tractor shed was granted consent as recently as 2016. But I can't actually tell you if and when they were ever used as a stable or a tractor store.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, you've reached the conclusion that the landscape, it's the impact on the landscape of a garden, and also the other. Now, if we go back to the photographs which you showed for a distance at a landscape photograph which you had previously, it was what you could see there was the Peak Edge Hotel standing out like a sore thumb, and you could hardly see the proposed building. It blended in quite nicely, and I can't really see how there's an impact of a garden. You know, I can't see that, Adrian. Perhaps you could explain.
Chair, I'm happy to come back as appropriate, but you may want to hear from speakers before.
Lovely. Okay.
Yes, I think that'd be the best course, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so we have two speakers for this application. The applicant, Damien Dugdale. Good afternoon, Mr. Dugdale. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm ready to go now, sorry. Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the applicant, Damien Dugdale, and I previously lived at the house Myrtle Grove next door to the site. I also owned and built the Peak Edge Hotel. Following granting of planning permission for holiday lodges at the Peak Edge Hotel, myself, my wife and 2 young children were ostracised locally, so much so we had to sell up and move away. First the hotel and then our home, Myrtle Grove next door. The buyer of Myrtle Grove did not wish to purchase the barns, stables, workshop and tractor store. Therefore, they were left unexpectedly redundant. I want to turn them into something of high quality, make the best use of vacant buildings, like I did with the Peak Edge Hotel and the renovation of Myrtle Grove. Over the past 20 years, I've invested millions into the local area, North East Derbyshire, employing over 100 people in the business I built up at the hotel. I generally do care about the local area. I employed a local planning consultant and used local architect to design a fitting scheme that followed the advice on the local planning policy requirements. I commissioned a bat survey, an ecologist report, a structural survey to iron out any issues that we might foresee and fully addressed before making the application. I'm very surprised at the refusal, given I followed the policy requirements of the council's own consultant officer, who initially told us in an email that everything was compliant to conservation policies. I was very willing to engage and amend anything to the scheme should the planning officer wishes to, but I was told nothing would make the scheme acceptable. Following comments from the planning officer report to you, I have checked the structural integrity of the stables and they do not require further structural work to convert them into my planned scheme. I'm aware of a lot of barn conversions in the surrounding area and I cannot understand why mine is not acceptable. I would employ local contractors, use local materials if the scheme was approved. Like the other high quality developments I have proudly completed locally, so I'm asking you to support this application to create an attractive, sensitive development out of an empty, redundant building. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Dugdale? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Dugdale, just a quick one. I heard it asked earlier whether the building was used for the purpose it was intended. Would you enlighten us on that one, please?
Yeah, of course. We use the tractor store and the stables for equipment storage for when we're managing the land, and I planted 6,000 trees, you'd be pleased to know, without anyone asking me to, and also hawthorn hedgerows around there. The perimeter of that building, they've all got hawthorn hedgerows which I wanted to reinstate that were never there before, and they were used as a facility for the hotel. We were producing our own, for pollination, our own crops and things, and micro, things and eggs, and basically mowing the grass and keeping the land we were custodians of in a ship-shape fashion, really. Yeah, so they were used. Yeah.
I am asking because I actually know they were used. I'm just asking for the benefit of my fellow colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dugdale, I've got one question for you, and I'm no builder, so please, I just need to be put right on this.
Yeah.
When you build barns and stables, etc., do you have sufficient footings to take this sort of window scape? Because I believe you'd have to have huge steel girders to take that sort of weight.
Yeah, they're very substantial footings with steel in them because the weight of tractors and equipment is substantial. Many tons of equipment moving in and out. So the buildings, I like to do things properly and future-proof things. So when that was built, it was built with a proper footing to enable it to be used for very heavy equipment running over and in it. So it's very strong, a steel frame that will take an upper floor, whereas the stables don't require any further construction work because it's only a single story and there's no weight load bearing on that at all.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No, thank you, Mr. Dugdale.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Charlotte Stainton. Hello, Charlotte.
Hello, thank you.
3 minutes.
Your planning policies are supportive of the conversion of existing buildings. There are no criteria in these policies which state that the building must have been constructed for a specific number of years. The age of the buildings is not relevant to your decision. In any case, as you've just heard, the stable building was originally constructed in 2005, over 15 years ago, and were used by Damien and his family. And Damien has explained why the buildings have become unexpectedly redundant. There are 4 relevant tests. First, is the building permanent and substantial? We have submitted a structural report prepared by 2 professional engineers, and the council structural engineer has raised no comments. The report concludes that the buildings are structurally capable of conversion. Why would your planning officers reach a different conclusion? I hope you can see that the buildings are both permanent and substantial, and this is evident from the photos you've just seen. The second test. Would the scheme need major rebuilding or extension? The structural report and plans have demonstrated that major rebuilding and extension is not proposed. There would be a simple glazed link between the 2 buildings, and that is the only new build element. The third criteria. Would the design and appearance be in keeping with the existing buildings and the surroundings? We believe we worked with the existing building to design an attractive scheme. There are various comments about materials and windows in the committee report, and we repeatedly made it clear to the planning officer that Damien is very willing to revise the design and materials. We firmly believe, however, that the conversion is sensitive to both the existing buildings and other properties in the landscape. The final policy requirement asks you to consider the curtilage. The proposed garden and parking areas use the existing areas which you've seen in the photographs, which are enclosed by stone walling and fencing and are separate from the fields. Damien would welcome any conditions to control garden outbuildings, lighting, surfacing, boundary treatments and landscaping, as you usually would with a conversion. Based on our experience of barn conversions, we firmly believe that this scheme complies with your relevant policies. Despite asking several times, we received no detailed feedback so that Damien could consider amendments. If you are not able to support the scheme in its current form, and of course we hope you are, please consider deferring the application and asking officers to work with us on the details. There have been no neighbour comments and no objections from any technical consultees. We acknowledge officer comments about impact on the countryside, but ask you to note the photograph earlier that the Peak Edge Hotel with substantial lighting and a large extended house at Myrtle Grove are both next door. Given this context, it seems very unlikely that the conversion would be prominent in the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. Just one for Charlotte. Charlotte, when we see the glazed front of the building, or what's potentially going to be the glazed front, is that going to travel right up to the apex of the ridge height? And is that, I'm assuming, is going to be either a second floor or a staircase or something, is it?
Yes, there's a first floor proposed in the tractor store. So the intention was to use that front area to light as much of that floor as possible. Therefore,
with natural light.
Yeah, therefore reducing the need for additional windows down the side. We thought that it was more in keeping to have a big opening in the front of the building. Having said that, if members were concerned, we'd be happy to accept a condition that some of those be panels rather than glazing, if that would make the scheme more acceptable. And this was the sort of thing that we were keen to negotiate with the officers.
I'd almost be inclined to see it stoned up and stone flagged roof, but you know, we'll see how the questions go. Thanks very much, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. It's just the landscape appearance that does people. Well, the officer has made note of this, and it was one of the things that they didn't like. Could you enlighten us about this? You know, about the landscape when we compare it to the surrounds.
The existing landscape is characterised by the large Peak Edge Hotel, which has been extended over many years, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with and was shown in the photograph earlier, as well as Myrtle Grove, which was previously owned by Damien, and again has been extended over the years with planning permission, and benefits from a large garden which is immediately next to this site. There are agricultural fields around, but it's not a pristine landscape with green fields. It's a working landscape, and it's a landscape that includes farms and houses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Adrian, you wanted to come back in?
No, no intention to come back in just at the moment, Chair. Of course, I'll seek to help and advise members, and if members ask that assistance, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions now for Adrian? Councillor Elliott? Councillor Armitage after.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. Adrian, I've read this through quite extensively because I Could you flick to the picture from Bellin Lane that shows the Peak Edge and Myrtle Grove and the farm building? We have a picture there that shows just how dwarfed it is in the landscape underneath the Peak Edge Hotel. I'm struggling to find if this was actually stoned up and made into a dwelling, I'm struggling to get in my own head why we're refusing it.
I think you may be able to go back to the slide. I think it's the first one of this group.
Yeah, not that one. It's the one that's taken from Belland Lane. That's
quite
a way away. I think
quite
it's
earlier
52.
on, Nikki.
I think it's there.
The first
52,
one,
I think
actually.
it's past it.
That's
Yeah,
that one there. Yeah.
Yeah. When I look at that, Adrian, the eyesore for me and the one I always wanted to see screened was that shot from Belland Lane and the huge thing that is the bedrooms and so on of the Peak Edge Hotel. When I look down past Myrtle Grove and I see that's been built up and stoned up and extended, and we gave it permission, and there are quite a lot along that Darley Road that are like that we've agreed. That one that's quite dwarfed in its character for me, I'm very surprised we've got to refusal for it. I wonder if you could just enlighten me a little bit.
Certainly, Chair. First of all, as members will know, you need to look at the policies of your development plan and then assess whether there's any other material issues that affect that consideration. And your development plan seeks to allow the change of use and conversions of buildings, as your policy says, providing they have regard to local distinctiveness in design and the character of the area, as Charlotte's mentioned when she spoke to members. And then, so first of all, you need to assess that. And in this instance, we have utilitarian style building that in normal circumstances, officers wouldn't support its conversion to a dwelling. In buildings in the countryside that you're normally seeking to retain are those of some character, stone-built buildings, for example, and not large-scale utilitarian style agricultural buildings such as this. And you'll remember at last committee we had the debate about the building at Ashover Hay, where members were concerned about an additional 6x6 building in the countryside that had resulted from other conversions of buildings that had taken place. So in this instance, Chair, when officers are looking at the scheme, first of all, we're looking at the character of the existing building. As I say, we wouldn't normally encourage the conversion of these sort of large agricultural style buildings. We're looking at the smaller and more characterful buildings, certainly in my opinion. But if I can ask members to look at their pages of the drawings on page 40 to 41, when you're looking at whether the significant alteration or amendment to the scheme in terms of the materials, the scale, the form, the general design and appearance, officers have looked at this and noted the simple form of the buildings that are there. And on page 41, I hope that exemplifies the concern that officers have in that the simple front elevation would be transformed from that block and sheeting finish to one of stone and timber cladding. The entrance door would be extended, as you just heard, right up to the apex of the roof, and that would all be glazed. On the building, that front elevation would all be glazed as opposed to the current simple opening. 2 garage doors would be introduced into the front elevation of the stable. The current side elevation of the building would have openings introduced to it again, be stoned and timber clad. The roof lights would be reduced from 3 to 1. And to my mind, and as officers take the view that that's significantly altering what is currently the very simple form and character of that building, even if you consider that these buildings are appropriate for conversion in the countryside. So that's the concern that we have as officers, in that what you have at the moment will be completely transformed in terms of the materials used, the openings that are there, and the character of that building. So that's the first consideration that you need to have. If you agree with officers that it doesn't meet your basic development plan policy, but there are other factors that mitigate that, and you talked about the Peak Edge Hotel, then you may take a view that that's overriding. But if you disagree with officers in terms of the first point, that actually the conversion does retain the character of that building, then that will be in accordance with your policies. So it's just that officers take the view that the level of alteration would mean that, first of all, irrespective of our concern about the conversion of these style of buildings anyway, but officers take the view that there'd be very little of that building in its current form left in any case. Your materials are all altering, you've got significant changes to the openings, and coupled with that, you'd introduce another residential curtilage into what is currently a generally open agricultural field. But again, you do need to take into account the Peak Edge Hotel, but ultimately each application on its merits, what your development plan policies say, are there other considerations that then outweigh that consideration?
Yeah. Can I come back, Chair? Is that okay?
Yes, certainly.
It was just that Adrian made mention of another application somewhere else in Ashover. I think it is Millen or wherever that was. If you'll indulge me, Chair, I want to make reference to an application just last month for a stable block at Eckington that we passed to be a bungalow. You know, and that had exactly the same connotations. And I think for consistency, we really need to be careful what we do allow and don't allow, because I cannot. Not got rid of the horses, but similar with this one, I think we need some consistency. And I look at the Peak Edge and I look at Myrtle Grove and I look at this, that's a redundant farm building. It either stays in and falls to pieces, or we allow it to be stoned up and used as a property. And I think it'd be less of an eyesore than the back of the bedrooms are at the back of the Peak Edge Hotel, from Belland Lane or anywhere else, to be fair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I think that's a consideration that members have to bear in mind. And the one thing I would say about the stables at Eckington is that the existing openings were being used in that instance. So the overall and inherent character of that building as a stable would have had some, you would have read that still in the converted building.
Thank you. Councillor Hill?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Elliott. I would rather see this building stone clad and cladding on the side. Whatever is done to it has got to be far better than let it stand there till it rots away, because then it does become an eyesore in the countryside. I just think it's a shame that we can't see the vision of it taking place and being made somewhere lovely for someone to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'd just like to take Adrian to task about the one that at Ashover Hay. If we're comparing, because you mentioned it, I mean, we don't usually compare one to another, but seeing you brought it up, this was a new build. It was outside the settlement development limit. This isn't a new build. It's a redundant farm building or a redundant building. You've mentioned about substantial modifications and rebuilding. Come on, it's going to be the same size. It's going to be recladded. I wouldn't say that was substantial. As regard the garden, I can't see that this is going to stick out like a sore thumb and be an adverse thing in the countryside. I can't see that at all. Peak Edge Hotel, yes, it's there, but Mr. Dugdale did plant an awful lot of trees that have yet to come to fruition. They're only, I think, about 3 or 4 feet high at the moment, but it will certainly soften the landscape for this application and also to the Peak Edge Hotel. And, it's in accordance to the conversion policy of North East Derbyshire, this, and it's like counting. Obviously has blended in beautifully to the rest of the area. You went against the one at Wales, at opposite the Miners' Arms at Gin Lane there in Ashover. We went against officers' recommendation, and they made a beautiful job of it when you didn't even want to see it being done. You know, you've got to look forward to these things. And we had a house in Ashover, right in the middle. It's got a monopitch tin roof. It's glazed all the way up the front. And yes, when it was built, everybody said what a mess it looked. But, you know, it's been accepted now. And this planning authority passed it. So it isn't out of the ordinary. It's an innovative building, and I think we've got to stick with these. It's a redundant building, and we're going to make use of it.
Thank you. Councillor Liggett?
Strangely enough, I was just going to bring exactly the same one. I know we're comparing one with another, but I was just going to say the one at Milltown, opposite the Miners, because it's exactly the same sort of building, and it does look really, really nice. I'd also draw issue with comments about light pollution. When it's the side of a hotel as big as that, I think there's already going to be light going out into the open countryside. I don't think that's going to make a lot of difference at all.
Thank you. Adrian, do you want to come back with anything?
Just very briefly, if I may, Chair, I'm just seeking to advise members on policies in your development plan, Chair. It is for members to interpret them and use them to determine applications, Chair. But just to mention policy GS 7C of the extant local plan, Chair, which is in terms of change of use and conversion, just to remind members that you should be looking to grant permission for changes of use where the form, scale, massing, materials, general design and appearance of the development respects the character and appearance of the original building, the site and its surroundings with particular regard to local distinctiveness and design. And the policies of the Ashover Neighbourhood Plan have policies that reflect that too, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, I just point out, Adrian, the Ashover Hay one was a new building. This is an existing building.
Thank you. Right, I think we've covered all we need to on this. I'm going to open the floor for a motion.
Excuse me, Chair, just before that, bearing in mind the way in which the debate's gone, would it be helpful if I just reminded members about motions again?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against the officer recommendation, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by the evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendation fails, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or another course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have anyone to put a motion forward? Councillor
Yes, please, Chair.
Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to go against officer's recommendation, and I would like this application to be passed. And the policy that I'm looking at is the conversion policy, GS7. And as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't fit any of the arguments which Adrian has put forward as regards the landscape.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott.
You're muted, Pete.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Technology, it just does my fruiting. I'll second it, Chair. I think also the relevance of the policies, SS1 sustainable development, I think it will be. I don't think it's overdevelopment in the countryside, SS9, and it is the reuse of a building, SDC1. So, and I really don't think it'll be too detrimental where it is and when it's grown up and softened with SDC3 and landscape character. So providing we can put some sort of condition in that Mr. Dugdale works with our planning team with regards to materials, I'd quite happily second that.
Thank you.
Just if I may, Chair, just to point out that the materials are clearly set out, Chair, on the submitted details. So whilst I would ask that if members are minded to approve the scheme, conditions are delegated to himself in consultation with yourself, Chair. The materials are specifically set out, so materials wouldn't be a condition that I would suggest is imposed on any approval that's granted, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor
Sorry,
Elliott,
Chair. Yeah, that's fine, Mammy Chair, but I know Adrian was concerned about the, shall we say, the stuff that could end up in the garden. I think some of that's subjective with kids' play equipment and all the rest of it, so I don't know whether Mr. Dugdale's got children or not and what age they are that we could end up with trampolines and bikes. So I'd just like that the applicant works with our planning team to make sure we get the best out of it.
lovely, thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Providing Councillor Armitage and Councillor Elliott are happy with this, can we make it clear in the motion that with regards to GS7, that it's our interpretation that it doesn't have an adverse effect on the character of the area or neighbouring land users? Can we make that clear there? And also that we support the conversion of buildings like this that are already in use to domestic properties.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll go along with that, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other comment, motions, etc.? No?
So, Councillor Elliott, are you comfortable with that slight change?
Yeah, to be honest, I'd actually said about the development in the landscape character anyway, but Mark has reaffirmed it, and I'm quite happy that that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Alan, would you just like to confirm what the motion will be?
Okay, Chair, as I understand it, the motion is to approve the application against officer recommendations for a range of reasons set out relating to various policies such as GS7. However, I think the key point is that the final conditions to be determined by the planning manager in consultation with yourself. Is that the essence of it, Chair?
As far as I'm aware, yes. Everyone's nodding their heads. Yep, that's fine. Okay, off we go then, Nicola, for a vote.
Thank you, Chair. If members could clearly indicate for, against or abstain. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hill.
You're muted, Betty.
Well, it's not often I can't talk. For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Potts.
Against.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader.
Against.
Councillor Rouse.
Against.
And Councillor Ruff.
For.
Chair, that's 7 votes for, 4 against with 0 abstentions. It's carried.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And we move on to our final planning application, which is 20/00931/FLH and NED/20/00 932/LB. Just to remind everybody that there are 2 votes on this. One is for planning and one is regarding a listed build.
Excuse me, Chair. Might it be appropriate for just to have a very quick break before we move into the application? Don't know how members feel about that.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Yep. 10 minutes. Might be back by 3:25. Is that okay?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Okay, as I say, we're on to our final planning application for the afternoon. And this is the one at Ridgeway. Adrian, are you going to take us through this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'll just do a brief introduction and go through the slides with Nikki, if I may. In this instance, Chair, as you've already outlined, I think we're asked to determine both a planning application and a linked listed building application for extension at Downlands Farm. The site is located in the Greenbelt, Chair, in a conservation area, and the farmhouse itself is a Grade 2 listed structure. Previously, and following discussion with officers, Chair, a single-storey mono-pitch roofed extension was approved at the site, and we'll see plans of that in a second. The current applications, Chair, seek consent for a two-storey double-gabled extension, but on the same floor footprint. In terms of the planning application, Chair, officers have concluded that whilst the extension is not proportionate in terms of its size, due to the location of the extension in a crease of the building, its impact on Greenbelt openness is very restricted. These represent the very special circumstances that otherwise justify the extension against Greenbelt policy. However, Chair, as members are well aware, special regard has to be paid to the building's listed status. The single-storey extension, Chair, was approved as officers considered it had a recessive and simple form that overall retained the simple, primarily linear character of the building that reflected its historic use and form. However, Chair, officers are concerned about the two-storey proposal. It's not considered acceptable as it is, as I've just said, 2 stories in height, and considered dilute the simple form and character of the building, covering up existing features, forming 2 odd and unbalanced gable elements, and also introducing a horizontal emphasis to the glazing at odds with the generally vertical emphasis of the building. It's considered, Chair, that this represents harm that's not outweighed by the predominantly personal benefits to the applicant. Officers, as members will note, Chair, also consider that this results in harm to the conservation area. As such, Chair, officers recommend refusal of both the listed building and planning applications, and ask that any decision to refuse the application is generally in line with the reasons set out in the officer report, with any alterations to the wording delegated to myself, Chair. Thank you. If I can just ask Nikki to bring the presentations up. Thank you, Nikki. The application site, Chair, it's Slow Lane at Ridgeway. It's in the Greenbelt, as I say, the Moss Valley Conservation Area, and it's a Grade 2 listed building. And special regard, as I've just said, Chair, need to be paid to the desirability of preserving the setting of the listed building and the conservation area in the listed building itself. Thanks, Nikki. The application site, Chair, in red. The dwelling house, the subject of the application is the long linear building at the bottom of the red line area, Chair. Thank you. It's the proposed plan and the existing at the top of the slide, Chair, the proposed at the bottom. The area of the extension is on the top drawing where it says patio. You can see that replicated then on the bottom where the 2-story extension is proposed. And we've got elevations next, I think, Nikki. Oh, sorry, the plan form. Just showing the plan was proposed at ground floor and at first floor level. So the existing form and structure of the building at the top, which shows the predominantly linear form of the existing dwelling house, and that's part of its, in officer's opinion, character. And then the proposed 2-story floor plans at the bottom. Thanks, Nikki. These are the elevations, Chair, and you can see in the top 2 drawings the existing front and rear elevations, and then you can see the proposed front and rear the next line down. So the alterations to the front, there aren't any. To the rear, you can see then the 2 additional gables that are proposed. As I say, they aren't balanced, one being narrower and therefore lower than the other one. And you can see the window detailing, which is generally horizontal in form rather than the primarily vertical emphasis that you can see of the openings in the cart sheds and the window detailing at the moment, the current 2-story gable that's there, and the window openings. Thanks, Nikki. Just for clarification, Chair, as I say, following discussion with officers, a single-storey mono-pitched extension was approved, and you can see that on the second drawing down on the right-hand side. Got a simple mono-pitch roof, retained the upper floor windows, and it's got the vertical emphasised windows at the lower ground area. Thanks, Nikki. Okay, move on to photographs now. The extension chair is proposed in the crease of the building that's formed by the right angle of the building as it runs primarily linear, which is the bit to the right. You can just see the projecting two-storey gable that's there that's there currently on the left-hand side of the photograph. So the extension would fill in that area there, and single-storey extension currently proposed would also be in that area. But as I say, this proposal is for 2 stories with the double gabled finish. Thanks, Nikki. And it's there, it would be on the left centre of the photograph is where the extensions would be formed. Thanks, Nikki. And again, photographs, certainly in an officer opinion, show the predominantly simple and vertical emphasis of the openings in the building, otherwise long and thin, and set out in the listing description. Building dates back a number of centuries. Thanks, Nikki. And these are some photographs that Mr. Moulton, I believe, will speak to shortly. Yeah, I'm sure he'll talk about them as he comes to speak to them, but I'm not entirely sure which application they refer to, if one at all. I couldn't find any history with regards to renovation to refer back to, but I'm sure Mr. Moulton will take us through those photographs, Chair, in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want a clarification at this point? If not, we'll move on to the speakers. Nope, thank you. We have 4 speakers this afternoon, and the first speaker is the ward member, Councillor Carolyn Rennick. Carolyn, you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to call this in to register my support for this application. In fact, I was surprised to see this recommended for refusal, as the council have already approved a planning application for a single-storey extension on the same footprint. However, the applicant subsequently wished to simply amend to a 2-storey extension, allowing them a much-needed living space to continue to accommodate their 2 young adult sons who are full-time farmers on this site. The applicants are well-established, respected farming family who've occupied successful farm on this lane for generations and tend to 200 acres in this parish alone. I know this property well. I go past it daily, and despite the photographs that you've seen at the back of the house, it is referred to as a 17th century property. I can remember this is a hugely dilapidated building that was some 20 years ago in absolute ruins, and subsequently care and synthetic and significant renovations in the 90s, early 90s. We have the home and the working farm as you see it today. So I think that this officer's presentation is a little bit misleading, because it looks a little like what you would have recognised as a 17th century building 20 years ago. I'm hoping the applicant's agent can show you a little bit about how this has been renovated over the last 20 years. But what they have done is actually enhanced and preserved the long-term future of this listed building. Secondly, I think the public benefits outweigh any harm in that it maintains a long local standing farming family in an area where affordable housing is very poor. And it's, for 2 20-year-old farmers who are up at 5:30 in the morning, I think that, it's essential that they are living on site. The property is actually very deceiving. It's just got 3 bedrooms. It is long and thin, except for the side, the end of the barn at the side. So I'm keen to ensure that this council supports a dedicated local working farming family on a farm of this scale, so it can continue to be sustainable for the next generation, and also not forgetting to support the food security in our area, particularly in these difficult and uncertain times. Thirdly, I don't believe this small extension has a materially greater impact on the openness when looking at its surrounding area, and is not a prominent intrusion, and will continue to look linear and not change the aspect at all. In fact, on the contrary, I believe this application will preserve the listed building and its perpetuity, used by and lived in by a long-standing local farm for the next generation to come. Indeed, officers themselves have stated on page 58.
30 seconds remain.
that the negative impact on the openness of and the greenbelt of this application is small. So I believe this truly meets the very special circumstances. It has raised no objections locally. And after your careful consideration, I hope you will too see that this modest extension for what it is and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Rennick? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rennick, I've seen those photos there about when it was run down, when it was derelict, and I gather it was renovated roughly around 1990, from what I understand. Do we know how long it had been derelict and unlived in before that? Just to give me some background.
Oh, I know it was. I don't know, because I've not heard. My husband was here, he would tell you exactly, and no doubt the agent might be able to tell you, but for years. I mean, it's probably been run down for decades. I mean, you'll see, hopefully there might be some photographs to come, I think, from what I gather from the agent, which might show you that the absolute state it was in. So, it was, in the 17th century, it was probably a barn, but in the 18th and 19th century, it was probably still a barn and some use, but it was not fit for any use when I first moved here 25 years ago.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? No. Thank you, Councillor. And we'll move on to the next speaker. And I've got it down as Laura Nash as the agent.
Yeah, I understand that Laura Nash is not speaking with us today, so your next speaker would be Doug Moulton.
Okay, thank you. I've got Helena Kelly down. Is she speaking?
Yes, Chair, she is, but she'll be speaking second, and she's essentially, I think, going to look at the history of the building. Doug Moulton will be taking the role, essentially, of the agent for this purpose.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Moulton?
Yeah, hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you've got 3 minutes when you're ready.
Okay, many thanks. Dowlands Farm has been within the applicant's family's wife for 3 generations. The applicants moved into the house in the 1990s. As known, it was in a very poor state of repair and dilapidated. The family has spent considerable time and effort in maintaining the future of the building and enhancing its long-term future so it's secured. If Nicola can just show those photographs, what we referred to earlier, I think the extent of the works cannot be underestimated and are best demonstrated by these photographs, which actually show the extent of what had to be rebuilt around the gable, keeping the front elevation intact, and everything else has been basically rebuilt by the applicant to make it livable as it is to now and to preserve that building. Dowlands is a working farm. There's 1,300 acres within 5 miles, and it's an active farm business and the focal point of the farm. As you've heard, it employs 2 sons who are aged 23 and 21, and also the applicant's wife, and they have to be on care 24 hours a day, and they are very much the next generation of the farm and will ensure its continuing success. Contrary to the officer report, it is considered there is public benefit. It will be continued to used as a family home, its optimum viable use. The application solely relates to the additional storey required to provide additional bedroom space so the applicant's sons can live and work on the farm to ensure it can function successfully. There's a significant shortfall of affordable homes in the district, including Ridgeway, and it's difficult to understand how the additional storey to the consented single storey extension would have a level of harm to the historic building to warrant a refusal. It's not visible from the front building. The proposed extension would be integrated into the rear of the building, which has been substantially rebuilt, being set back and the ridgeline lower than the existing roof line. A bifold door modernises how the rear of the building can be used to link the outside space, a common feature to modern buildings. The farm will retain its original L-shaped layout, notwithstanding the extant permission for the single-storey rear extension. It will remain as a group of buildings, of rural buildings of traditional material. The surrounding countryside of the building, its setting will be unchanged. My colleague Helena Kelly will focus on the heritage considerations of the application in greater detail. The site is within the green belt, and we can concur with the officer report that a 2-storey extension would have little
30 seconds remain
on the openness of the green belt, particularly considered its siting within the complex of existing buildings and the existing permission for a single-storey extension on the identified footprint. In setting out the context of the specific need for the two-storey extension, and we consider minimal harm to the listed building, we respectfully request that councillors support the proposal and approve the application.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Foster, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, question for Mr. Moulton. Regarding in our papers, item 7.9, our officers believe this to have a negative impact on the openness of the greenbelt. They say it's small, but they say it's nevertheless present. I wonder if we can, that is an interpretation that, as far as I'm concerned, I wonder what your interpretation was on that level of impact.
Okay, well, I think it's negligible because of the L-shaped grouping of that building and it being tucked in that corner to the rear of the building and the built form of the existing farm buildings, and the fact that you've already got the stamp permission for the single-storey extension, the footprint of the building is already going to change. So it's about that. There is a increase on the open. There is a change on the openness because you're doing that additional second story. But as it's tucked in tight to the L shape of the building, I think the overall impact on the openness is, like I say, negligible.
Okay with that, Councillor Foster?
Yeah. So it just cut off at the end, but yeah, thank you, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. It is pretty much in line with what Councillor Foster's just asked, and it was about the openness. Mr. Moulton, when I looked at some pictures, and I only briefly saw it earlier, and that was when the footings and some of the breeze was going up on the long part of the building, it looked like the rear of it was actually into a mound of earth. Is that now onto open landscape, or is it still fairly high with earth at the back of that building?
Sorry, I'm just trying to. Which picture are you looking at?
Well, I can't see it obviously. I'm looking at yourself, but it looked like it was the original. I could see a white limed wall where all the building was in tatters, and you were building up the breeze on the front, what looked like either the back or the front side of the building. But it looked like it was built into a bank. Did I see that rightly or wrongly?
Yeah, where the sort of extension is to be proposed is where the existing patio is, and that's set lower down into that corner of the gable and the rear building. Obviously, that rear elevation, which the extension is going to connect to the building, has been what's been comprehensively rebuilt through the previous renovations of the building. And then obviously to be fair, these pictures are from the applicant, Alan Finlay, and I actually went to see him to look at the building, and luckily he had all pictures of how the building had sort of changed over its lifetime.
Yeah.
And we spent a good deal of time looking through them. I mean, I could have given you about 50, so I just tried to get somewhat with the most representative. And I think this has done it really well about how the building's evolved since the mid-90s. And how it sits, and then obviously where that pile of rubble is, that's now been landscaped, but that would stay existing because the extension would be in the lower bit where the patio is now, which at the end of the day is really dark and not very useful.
That's what I was aiming at. So the huge mound of rubble is actually now flat and gone.
Absolutely, that's all been landscaped, and I think the clearest way to say is that's a historic photo to show how it's been brought back to the slides that are in the officer presentation.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Councillor Potts?
Hello, Mr. Moulton. Could I ask you, please? You've obviously said that it's not this extension wouldn't be visible from the front because it's at the rear. But at the rear of the property, can you confirm or otherwise whether there are any public footpaths to the rear of the property, and would it be visible to users of the countryside from the rear elevation of it?
I would, to be honest with you, I'd have to check that myself. I can do that now if you want to give me a few minutes. I can check for you and come back to you on that point on public footpaths and views from the rear.
Yes, please, if you would. They looked on one of the photos as if it was sort of a woodland behind it. But I don't know if there are any public footpaths through there. But if you would, please, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
if you give me 5 minutes, I'm happy to clarify that.
Would the planning officers be able to help on that?
Alan?
Hello?
Alan, would it be possible for Councillor Rennick to come forward on this, because she's local, she'd have more knowledge on this?
Councillor Rennick spoke, I'm afraid, as a ward member, and she's answered her questions.
Right,
so from our point of view, she can't have any further involvement in the meeting.
Thank you. Right, are there any other questions? No. We'll come back to you, Mr. Morton, when you've been able to find out that information, or whoever comes first. But I don't know if Adrian will be able to pick any of that up.
Unfortunately, Chair, I'm not aware that there are public rights of way to the rear of the building. I'm not aware that there are, of course.
Like I say, I'm not aware, but I'm more than willing to have a quick look now to try and give you some clarification on that. If you, like I say, if you just give me 5 minutes, I'll try and do it on the desktop now.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to Helena Kelly. You've got 3 minutes, Helena.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Helena Kelly. I'm the heritage consultant for the applicant, and I wrote the heritage statement with the application. I assess that the application would result in a very low level of harm to the listed building, and I find the harm to be at a very low level because the proposed extension would have a negligible impact on the historic structure. It links to the house through the modern rebuilt barn that we've just been looking at, and the elevation that would be affected by the proposed extension was rebuilt in the 1990s. The architectural detailing on that elevation, such as window openings, were changed then, and there are some photographs in the heritage statement that show that. And the south elevation of the property, the front elevation, is, as we saw from the plans, unaltered by the current proposals. And a lot of the architectural detailing described in the list description is on that front elevation, and none survives on this back elevation that's been rebuilt in the 1990s. The extension would not be visible above the roofline of the house, and it's designed to be in keeping with its character and appearance. There are examples of farmhouses in North East Derbyshire with double gables, such as Fanshawe Gate Hall, Troway Hall and Hag Hill House, and they are all also listed as Grade 2 17th century farmhouses, so very equivalent to Dowland. Dowland Farmhouse itself has an L-shaped plan, and that's in the list description as well, and the proposed extension respects that and maintains that L-shaped plan, and the proposal does not significantly distract from that historic plan of the farmhouse. The scale and mass of the proposed extension is not significant compared to the mass of the farmhouse and barn range. The linear form of the farmhouse and barn would remain readily apparent, and the courtyard arrangement of the farmhouse and barn and other agricultural buildings to the front of the farmhouse would be unchanged. The historically domestic and agricultural parts of the building would continue to be read as distinct elements, as they do now, despite the use of the modern barn in part as an extension to the farmhouse living accommodation. And the glazing would be in relation to a modern extension and would help to make a distinction between the modern and historic elements of the property. And the proposed glazing would not introduce any irreversible change to the historic building. Government guidance requires that where there's potential harm to a listed
30
building,
seconds remain.
that harm is categorised as either less than substantial or substantial, and that within that category the extent of the harm is clearly articulated. And here I find the harm to be at the lowest end of the scale effects, less than substantial, and that should be weighed against the public benefits. And again, government guidance is clear: the benefits do not always have to be visible or accessible to the public or accessible to the public to be genuine public benefits. And the example given in guidance is works to a listed private dwelling which secure its future could be a public benefit. Thank you.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Foster?
Question for Elena. When we look at that definition you mentioned, which is the less than substantial harm to significance of a designated heritage asset, it's got to be weighed against public benefits. What struck me is not the fact that the building itself would be a public benefit, the preservation of that as a farm, as a working farm. But for me, what struck me is the fact that it's not just a working farm, but it's about food production. It's about food security. And I wondered if in your opinion, that food security and food production for that area, as well as providing employment, would be considered, this is in your view, would that be considered a public benefit?
I mean, I'm a heritage consultant, so it's probably a little bit beyond my remit to say, but from the heritage perspective, it is listed as a 17th century farmhouse. This property has been associated with local food production for hundreds of years, and continuing that viable use is I think something that could be termed a public benefit, and I think that follows the guidance on what a public benefit is. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Morton, are you able to come back with your answer regarding footpaths, etc.? I think it's disappeared.
Mr. Wilson?
Hello,
Chair,
Jim.
I've been on the Derbyshire County Council mapping portal, and the closest footpath to Dowlands Farm is actually footpath 32, which goes from Slode Lane to the south of the farm, from in an easterly direction towards the St John the Evangelist Church. I don't know if there's a plan that we can see just to demonstrate that, to show that. So you can see on the plan, there's a towards the bottom right hand corner. You can see the word path.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so that is the footpath. It goes from the road, which is to the left of the word path, and then it goes in a off the page to in a easterly direction. So if you can do the arrow, but that's the road. Then the footpath goes the opposite way. So no, the opposite way towards path, and then off where it says 103.8 in that direction.
Right.
So that's a definitive footpath. That's Eckington footpath number 32.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jim.
Yeah, apologies for that. I couldn't get back onto the Zoom meeting momentarily.
That's fine. Thank you. So at least we know where. Mo, is that okay for you?
So if I'm interpreting that correctly, the back of the building isn't visible from that footpath. It's so frustrating because I want to ask Caroline Rennie because of residents. But from my interpretation of that and that explanation that's just been given, I take it that it's not visible.
Excuse me, Chair. Could Councillor Rennick turn off her camera, I think, for these purposes? That's normal practice for witnesses once they've spoken. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further
sorry, can I apologies. The actual applicants just sent me a text on the footpaths. I don't know if that would help for a bit more clarity.
Okay.
Is that apologies? He said the land behind is in Finley's ownership in the woodland, and then obviously the footpath is to the right of the property and runs away as per the council's comments. So yeah, no visibility from the rear.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you for that. So any further questions? No, I'll open the floor for comment and debate. Councillor Reader, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, Chair. I have real concerns about this. I'll be honest, you know, we're talking about something that is happening in the green belt, and you know, we want to protect the green belt and stop things from sprawling out and looking inappropriate. So they already have planning consent for a single story. So my feelings are, I don't understand how adding an extra story to this is going to add any extra value to this to the farm, or with regards to the building. And I'm being asked to trust the experts and our officers feel that it might be, you know, a low level part of harm to this building, but my feeling is it is still harm to this building. So I'm yet to be convinced, Chair, yet by what I'm hearing, that it's appropriate to be doing this to a heritage listed building. So I'm still open to the conversation, but I'm just putting it out there that I have real concerns about this.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak about both those that Councillor Reader brought up before I speak a little further. The one about the green belt, the aim of the green belt is to prevent sprawl by keeping land permanently open. If you look at where it is, much like the architect pointed out, Mr. Moulton, it's just infilling, for me, part of a building. So I don't think, for me, I do believe it is negligible when it comes to affecting the openness. So there is one, it is there and it does affect it, but it's negligible. That's what I believe. That can then be outweighed by public good. It can be outweighed, and it says that in the policy, it says that in the MPPF. When it comes to harm to heritage, that's much the same. That can be outweighed as well. And I think that's what we're being asked as members to deliberate on. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Councillor Reader. So that's the first part. The aim of the green belt is to prevent sprawl. For me, this is only the change from a single extension into a double extension. Let's have a look. Where was I going next? It's not inappropriate development in the green belt. There's exceptions in 7.8 of the pack, page 58. Exceptions including extensions or alterations of a building, providing there be no impact on openness. So this is an extension. Now, while it's not a single extension any longer, it's a double extension. Further to that, I believe it's negligible, the difference that it makes. And then moving further on to the heritage, much like when I asked the question to the heritage consultant, if we look how it's defined on 7.22 of page 61, our officers consider it to lead to less than substantial harm to the significance. So it's less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset. This harm should be weighed against public benefits of the proposal. Now, what I was speaking about earlier when I mentioned that, the public benefits here, I believe, it's not just about providing extra housing for an existing working farm where you've got 4 adults. So you've got a family of 4 people living together in currently a 3-bedroomed property. This means that they can continue working, and they can continue working in this working farm, providing, for me, food security, providing employment. I know that they work cattle and they work sheep over the 200 acres. So there's more than enough public benefit for both the greenbelt issue, the negligible harm to the greenbelt, the openness of the greenbelt, absolutely negligible. And it says in the summary and conclusion of page 62, 8.1, so whilst the harm is identified is considered to be less than substantial, it again makes that point there. We've got to weigh up here whether those public benefits outweigh that small harm. So for me, it's clear. It's more than clear. This is just an infill from a. It's as easy as it's an infill of the back of a building that nobody sees. There's already going to be a single extension there. This is only moving it to a double extension. It provides 4 bedrooms rather than 3 bedrooms. It's not as though they're doing anything much different apart from providing living accommodation. It was derelict in the first place from the 1990s. This is about providing a working farm and 5 working adults and keeping our food production up. So I'm more than happy to support this, that it goes through and we go against officers' recommendations, because we can here, quite simply, we make the judgment here that those public benefits outweigh that small harm. It's small, even when you look at it from what the officers have described it, I believe it's less than small. So I'm quite happy to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, then Councillor Armitage and Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. While I agree with some of the comments that Councillor Foster's made, I have to say that I do agree with Councillor Reader. It may be seen as infilling, a small infill, but in my opinion, it's out of character. The design is out of character with that building, and that's all I'd like to say at this moment.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with everything that Councillor Foster said. The thing that he hasn't touched on is the fact that in time somebody will have to move out, and they'll have to travel backwards and forwards to the farm. And you know, we're trying to reduce carbon, aren't we? As regards the style, the footprint isn't any bigger, which has already been passed. And they're putting a twin gable end. I think it's looks a better design than the one that's already been designed.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's really just to carry on from what Councillor Foster said. When I look at this and I look at paragraph 718 on page 60, it sits there and states about paras 184202 of the MPPF that heritage assets should be conserved in a manner appropriate to their significance, so they can be enjoyed for the contribution to the quality of life of existing and future generations. Well, if we don't help out the existing generation now on a working farm, you know, I'm sort of with Mark Foster that something so small on the back of this, it doesn't really encroach in the green belt that much. And as we've rightly said, the footprint is there already. It's essentially another lift on that one single extension. And I know Mark mentioned 7.8, but if you look at 7.9, similar, the scale of the two-storey extension, like elements that I see other nearby buildings, the impact on the openness is small or tiny, but nevertheless present. It's tiny. So we've really got to look at the thing in the whole. And I think to support a working farm in the Greenbelt is the way forward. I'm sort of with Mark Foster on this.
Thank you.
You know, we're keeping a family together and the livelihood going.
Yeah, very important. Any other comments? Councillor Reader?
Yeah, can I just make a point here? I am not against here. I've said I want to keep an open mind with this right to the end. I said at the beginning of what I said, I was waiting to hear some evidence of it. I'm still concerned about it. I did raise my points of why I'm concerned, but I feel very much that I'm being sort of tarred with this brush that I'm against sort of supporting a working farm. And that is absolutely not what I was saying. I was talking about my concerns about the green belt and openness of that, preventing sprawl into that. If we're setting a precedence with this, and also the concern around a heritage site. And I'm still sticking with those thoughts, but I will keep an open mind while the debate is going on.
Thank you, Councillor. Adrian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully, just draw some of this together, hopefully to help members. There are two elements here, Chair, two different applications. The first is a planning application, which you should be looking at in terms of your policies in respect of Greenbelt development, and as has been debated, that it needs to be set aside from the listed building application. So in terms of Greenbelt impact, extensions to dwelling houses are only not inappropriate if they are proportionate to the existing dwelling. So that's the first consideration in terms of Greenbelt that members need to assess. Is the extension proportionate? If it's not, it's inappropriate development, and you should only be granting permission for it if there are very special circumstances, and they should be special, which should be very special, so not normal run-of-the-mill circumstances. In an officer opinion, Chair, the size of the extension, we don't consider it proportionate to the dwelling. But in this instance, because of the site specifics, it's set it within the crease of that building. And therefore, in addition to the single-storey addition that's been granted, officers on balance consider they are very special site-specific circumstances that justify the inappropriate development in this case. And members will need to take a view on whether, first of all, it is proportionate. If it is not proportionate, it's inappropriate development, and you must need then to look at very special circumstances. If you consider it is proportionate, then it's appropriate development in the Greenbelt, and you don't need very special circumstances. In terms of the issue of the listed building, Chair, the issue that you have in your policies is that development affecting listed buildings should be appropriate to the historic form, setting, detailing of the existing building. That differs slightly from the NPPF, which talks about harm, substantial harm, less than substantial harm. If I can just go through that very briefly, Chair. The NPPF talks about harm in its totality. It's where a heritage asset is disposed of, demolished, or is lost. So that would normally be the complete demolition of a building, for example. This is the proposal for an extension, and by definition, in my opinion anyway, impact on a listed building must have some detrimental impact, or else you'll be seeking to preserve the building in its current form. But the NPPF only talks about less than substantial harm as opposed to complete and utter harm. But then it sets out that there is probably a scale of level of less than substantial harm. So you need to take a view, first of all, on where that falls. And in officer opinion, the impact of the extension on that form and detailing of the listed building is at the higher end of less than substantial because of the detailing that's proposed, the double gabled finish with the, it doesn't match onto the existing gable that there is on the back, for example. It takes away the current features. The element of the building is more horizontal and vertical, all the issues that I've mentioned before. And therefore, if you, and I believe you do need to conclude that there is less than substantial harm on whatever element of the scale that is, and Councillor Foster believes that it's on the bottom end of the scale. Officers take a different view, but that's a view that you will need to take a decision on. Where that then falls, you need to assess whether there are any public benefits that outweigh that harm. And if you're on the lower end of the scale, as Councillor Foster suggested he would be, then the public benefits don't need to hit quite a higher threshold as, say, an officer view would be. And officers take the view that the benefits here are primarily private, and therefore the public benefits are limited, not outweighing the harm. And just to help Chair in terms of what is meant by the term public benefit, the guidance set out in the planning practice guidance sets out that public benefits may follow from many developments and could be anything that delivers economic, social or environmental objectives as described in the National Planning Policy Framework. Public benefits should flow from the proposed development. They should be of a nature or scale to be of benefit to the public at large and not just be a private benefit. However, benefits do not always have to be visible or accessible to the public in order to be genuine public benefits. For example, works to a listed private dwelling which secure its future as a designated future heritage asset could be a public benefit, for example. And it goes on to also say examples of heritage benefits are sustaining or enhancing the significance of an asset and the contribution to its setting, reducing or removing risks to it, and securing its optimum viable use. I hope that's helpful, Chair, but members need to differentiate the planning elements of this to the listed building elements of this, and the fact that there may be public benefits could be very special circumstances in terms of a greenbelt impact, but are probably more properly addressed in terms of the impact to the heritage asset and this issue of less than substantial harm. I do hope that helps, Chair, but they are two distinct elements and need to be treated as such.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Questions? No, I'm going to open the floor then for motions. Councillor Foster?
Yeah, in line with what Mr. Kirkham said there, I'm happy to propose that we give this planning permission both the listed element and for the greenbelt element as well. The first one, in that, from what I understand, from what you've said, Adrian, that it is appropriate, so we don't need special circumstances, because it is just that extra story. It is just one extra bedroom, and it's private. It's away from the view of the public. There's no path around the back, and it is infilling just in the crease of a building. So for me, that it is appropriate development. So that's the first one. Second one, that I'm happy with that double gable. I don't find that looks out of place at all. Not one bit. I know that they're offset. There's a smaller gable and a larger gable, but you often see that in the countryside anyway. So I don't find that's inappropriate at all. When it comes to those public benefits, I do believe those are public benefits. It is securing this property as a heritage asset. So I'd like to put that forward as well. But in addition, it is about supporting a working farm. It's about providing jobs. It's about providing food security and providing local food. So I think there's lots here that that point us in that direction. And I believe that less than substantial harm, much like you've said, is much on the lower end of the scale and not on the higher end of that scale. It's on the lower end of that scale, and it's outweighed by those public benefits. So I'd like to propose it that we give planning permission for this application on that basis.
I'll second that, Chair.
Got hands going up everywhere.
Right, excuse me, Chair. From our point of view then, are we taking both of these together, or would it be more appropriate to take each application separately?
I'd be happy for both together.
I'm happy for both together. I think it's less confusing for everybody.
Yeah.
Everyone
Okay,
happy with that?
just to clarify, Adrian, have you got any concerns about that?
I don't, Chair. I personally would have asked for 2 votes, but providing all members are satisfied that all elements are contained within that vote, Chair, and members are in their own minds having the 2 different elements, Chair, then that would be acceptable. And just to conclude, Chair, if members are minded to grant consent, would that be with conditions delegated to myself in consultation with yourself? And finally, Chair, just to be clear that Councillor Foster's putting this forward in terms of the extension being proportionate and therefore appropriate development in the Greenbelt, and also that there is the less than substantial harm at the lower end of the scale, and that's outweighed by the public benefits. So both those elements are disentangled and set out in that form, Chair. I believe that's what Councillor Foster.
It's exactly that. That's it. Thank you.
Chair, I do have concerns about having just the one vote for the 2 separate applications. I'd be concerned that if the application is turned down, we wouldn't know whether members were voting against both the planning permission and the listed building consent. I think in order for us to know for sure what members' feelings are, I think we should have 2 separate votes.
Okay, I'll bow to your judgment, Jim. We're going to go for 2 votes.
So that would be the first one on the application 00931 FLH, the proposed 2-storey rear extension. Effectively, the motion there is to go against officer recommendations and to grant planning permission.
I believe so. Councillor Foster, are you happy
for
with
the
that?
reasons I've given to Mr.
For the
Kirk,
reasons as set out in the meeting, with any conditions to be determined by the planning manager in consultation with the chair. Is that the essence of it, members?
I do believe so. Councillor Armitage? You were seconding it? Yeah, everyone's happy with that. Okay, Nikki, we'll go for a vote now for that first one.
Okay, so the first vote, if you can clearly say for, against or abstain. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hill.
Betty, you're on mute.
For. Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Reader.
Against.
Councillor Rouse.
Abstain.
Councillor Ruff.
For.
So, Chair, that's 8 votes for, 2 against, with 1 abstention, and that is carried.
Thank you. Move on to vote 2.
Yeah, so again, that is to go against officer recommendation and to give listed building consent to the application. Again, for the reasons set out in the meetings, with any final conditions to be determined by the planning development manager in consultation with yourself. Is that the essence of it, members?
I believe so. Is that okay, Councillor Foster? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So for the vote, we can clearly vote for, against, or abstain. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hill.
For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader.
Against.
Councillor Rouse.
Abstain.
And Councillor Ruff.
For.
Okay, same result, Chair. 8 for, 2 against, with 1 abstention, and that's carried.
Thank you. Thank you, all members. And we've not got much left to go. Item 8's been dealt with, unless there's anything Adrian needs to add.
On to item 9, Chair. Maybe my agenda's.
Yeah, item 8 was the late representations report, so that wouldn't be dealt with at this stage, and members received.
Apologies, Chair.
So it is item 9 now, yes.
Lovely, thank you.
Did just want to make one comment on the appeals, Chair, if members will indulge me.
Yep, go ahead.
There were just two appeals reported this month, Chair, as members will have seen. It's the allowed appeal, which I did just want to bring to members' attention and just to encourage you again, if you've not already done so, to give that a read. I wish I could be more helpful in directing members on how that helps you in your decision making, but it's a decision to grant consent for housing at Hallfield Gate Lane, and it is in contrast to the recent decision handed down at Nethermore Road, the A61 at Tupton, which was dismissed, as members will recall. In this instance at Hallfield Gate Lane, the inspector set out that the tilted balance was engaged, which weighs in favour of granting permission for housing, and came to that conclusion, then, as I say, granted consent. It's interesting also the comments that the inspector made with regards to your publication draft local plan, which the inspector gave moderate weight to. I do think it does re-emphasise the importance of having an up-to-date development plan, despite the fact we have in excess of our 5 years rolling housing land supply, Chair. But I would encourage members to have a read of that, the importance of weighing up your development plan policies when making decisions on planning applications. It is an interesting read if you're stuck for something to do for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments on that for Adrian? Well, item 10 is matter of urgency, which I have none, unless anybody else has anything they want to bring up. Thank you all very much for this afternoon, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Good night.
Thank you, Chair.